Hello and welcome to the SCI Guys, the show where we talk about the crazy, weird and wonderful stories from the science world. I'm Corey and as always I'm joined by my co-host Luke Cuthbert.
Hello. Don't like that you looked at me as you said the word crazy.
This week we're talking about the science of life on other planets.
Ooh.
Very interesting. Oh, sorry Luke, what is that? It
no.
appears my phone is ringing. Hello? President of the world? That's you speaking?
Wow.
There's an alien invasion happening right now, Luke.
I don't like change.
And what's that? The only thing the aliens want is the best podcast in the world.
Oh no, but that's mine. I want to keep it.
That's right, Luke. You do want to keep it. But it's okay. What we can do is show the aliens just some of the best clips from the past year of the best podcast in the world.
And perhaps they will spare us.
Perhaps they will. Well, let's start with the clips. So it's multidisciplinary.
Multidisciplinary.
Sorry, there's an entire linguistics paper being written right now about exactly why that's difficult to say. Multidisciplinary.
There we go. I feel like there should be an extra syllable in there.
Right.
It doesn't sound right. Right?
So this is where linguistics brain goes into action.
Yeah.
Why doesn't it sound right? Because a lot of discoveries, a lot of theories in linguistics have been from moments like this of a linguist who's had the training go, hang on, why is that? So you look at the word multidisciplinary. It feels like there should be another syllable in there, right?
Yeah.
It feels like it should be multidisciplinary. So I think it's the emphasis. Gut reaction on that is that the stress feels like it should be in a different place. So you've got multi, emphasis on the mul. So you're on syllable. Sorry, I'm doing this in my head now. You'll need to edit this down. All right. Say it one more time.
Well, can I just say what I think it is that you're both...
Yeah.
You're putting the emphasis on the C. The emphasis should be on the N. So you both said you basically said scenary.
Yeah.
It should be multidisciplinary.
Multidisciplinary.
No, that sounds
Yeah, but
worse
you say
to me.
discipline. Discipline.
And that's the reason. That's your reason.
We did it.
Because you're used to hearing if you're pulled into a meeting at work to be told off, it's a disciplinary, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got to do multi. I think you land the emphasis on the second syllable. Does that feel right? Multi. I say
no, it's
multi.
It's on the
first
mul.
syllable.
It's on the first. It's on the first, right? So multidisciplinary. Discipline. So you got to land on the first and multidisciplinary. You got to land on the first and fifth syllable of a 7-syllable word, and I think that's just really confusing because you've got that long string of unstressed syllables in the middle.
It is really difficult.
I still think it's multidisciplinary.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong. I just find it really difficult to say.
I would say multidisciplinary.
Multidisciplinary.
Oh, see, I would say you got 3 stresses. Disciplinary. Multidisciplinary.
See, I feel like that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm losing it. Especially because when words are that long, I don't read them. I just kind of let my brain fill in the blanks. I'm like, I know roughly what's there, right? I'll get it. And I can't get that one. I can't.
Well, good chat.
But yeah, it's an emphasis thing. So you could probably get a small linguistics paper out of that as people try and work out what sounds not correct, what sounds natural, what sounds wrong. I'm trying to avoid value judgments there, but that tripped us up somehow. And yeah, there's a whole analysis to be done on stress patterns and things like that.
Well, so interesting.
I'm getting very stressed from this. No, but I think that's interesting. This is really, really good. We've actually done like a little sort of insight into actual linguistics through my mess up of one very, very difficult word.
We've done like the first bit of the paper.
If you're friends with linguists and you stumble repeatedly over a word, it will just get dissected for a long while people try and work out. You know what?
Thank goodness none of us are linguists, Tom.
Yep.
And this is why linguists
gonna drink some water and shut up.
No, so we've got it. We know that it's multidisciplinary. There we go. But what does that mean? I have a very hard number on like what level of detransitioners is like acceptable, right? That number is 49%. You can go up to 49%, and if you go past 49%, okay, then start putting the limitations. Because what you were right. This is what happens, right? If you let's say you've got anything less than 49%, then you actually have got a very high success rate with helping trans people, right? With helping people. If you had if you were to basically stop treatment at anything less than 49%, what you're doing is saying, these trans people, their experience is worth less than these non-trans people.
It's 51%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also with like if you have like cancer and you've got like a really risky treatment where there's a 20% chance that you'll live, you'll still take that because there's a chance that you will live. But when it comes to like trans stuff, like there's like a less than 1% rate of detransitioners, and because of those detransitioners, so many people are hesitant.
Well, it clearly comes down to the fact that ultimately people don't want trans people to exist, right? And they're coming up with any reason that, well, actually there's detransitioners. What if people are making a mistake? Okay, right, but you can see that most people aren't making mistakes. So if...
Objectively.
If you have an issue with people being depressed and all of that stuff from having dysphoria, wouldn't it be better to have, like, as few people as possible have dysphoria? And if essentially what detransitioners experience is dysphoria, would it not be better to let more people transition, and then if you've got detransitioners, as long as they're below the level of trans people at the beginning, then you're good.
It's also super interesting how this is like, it almost breaks the traditional political lines, because I think you could probably make a fairly safe bet that at least a sizable majority of the people who are sort of pro-trans will probably be on the left side of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think you can probably make a fairly safe bet that a decent chunk of the people who are anti-trans are on the right side of the spectrum.
Yeah, of course.
And what's super interesting about that is that we're talking about, having access to like taking testosterone if you're born female, for example.
Yeah.
And in the traditional political lines, the right would want to like reduce the amount of red tape in place to individuals making free choices in a free market economy, right? And so the traditional line would be, if you want to purchase testosterone, which is not a class A, B, or C substance, why, if there isn't a good reason to have it regulated, then we shouldn't regulate it.
Yeah.
But then in this case, it's sort of the left or members on the left arguing for the liberalization of access to or the decrease in the amount of regulation.
Yeah.
It's super interesting.
I think a lot of it is just like fear mongering. Like it's like it's pretty simple that like read any of the studies, they all suggest that like if a trans person has the accessibility to has access to medical transition, after medical transition, they will be happier. Yeah. And it's so strange to me that there's like this massive debate about like, what should we do with trans people? How many barriers should we put in place to stop them doing those things that may make them happier? It's so strange because it's just like, you give somebody who is sad that they don't have tits. They'll probably be a bit happier about that.
I think it's because it makes them question the entire basis of their worldview.
Yeah, true. Yes. Yeah.
But this is what's frustrating to me, is that it's so clear. Like the evidence that we have makes it very obvious that just letting people get on with themselves is fine. And these the protocols for you need to be living in your assigned gender role for a year and a half before getting bottom surgery. That would probably not be an issue if people were just able to live as whatever gender they wanted. Yeah. For and leading up to that, right? Do you know what I mean? Like if you realize you're trans when you're say 12, and your parents are like, okay, cool, be trans. Then by the time you're 18, you're not gonna have to wait for bottom surgery because you'll have, what I mean? You'll have been living in it for that long. So years. This is what's frustrating is that there are issues with the protocol that we've got. Definitely, it's not perfect, but it would definitely be made better if people just bloody accepted. Obviously, more resources in general, but if people just the bare minimum you could do is just accept and support the trans people in your life. Mm-hmm. And if a kid is saying. If a kid is sort of being non-normative in their gender expression, you don't need to force them to be trans. Not that anyone is doing that. People genuinely say people are doing that. That's not what it is. You just need to be like, yeah, you can do what you want. Yeah. And that is genuinely taken into being people are transing kids. But ultimately, who is really transing kids? Who is really imposing their ideology on children here?
Trans YouTubers.
The people that are saying, hey kid, you can kind of do what you want, or the people that are saying, hey, you look like a boy, so you have to be a boy, and if you're not, then I'm going to send you to conversion therapy. I feel like you're the bad ones here.
Matt and Dave, did you have any, when you were in school, did you have, this is a thing we have in the UK, I'm interested to know if it happens over where you are, did you have a person who comes into school to tell you scary stories about drugs, and what stories did they tell you?
I remember we had a Christian biker who came in and told us that porn was bad and it ruined his life, and whenever he closed his eyes he could just see porn.
And did he do it in front of you? Oh no! They're everywhere!
Hold on.
They're touching me! Put them away!
This man doesn't need to log on to a computer or pay anyone anything.
Oh man,
that sounds.
The teenage boys in that crowd are like, hook me up. That sounds awesome.
It really did not have the effect I think they thought it was gonna.
Hey
People
guys,
were looking at him like he was a superhero.
Here's a trick for free porn for life. You know?
The other thing we have in Australia is in primary school, the thing called the Life Ed van often comes along. Did you have this, Matt, where they have Harold, who is a giraffe puppet who pops up and tells you that smoking's bad, and this is this is how your body works, and that drugs are bad. But I don't know how horrific the stories Harold was telling was.
Yeah, I remember that being more just about showing your organs and stuff.
Yeah,
I don't
trying to
remember
stay healthy.
Yeah,
we had a guy come in and tell us that if you take LSD, you will believe you are an orange and you will peel off your own skin.
That stresses me out so much.
Did he hold up his left hand and all the skin's gone? Speaking from experience.
It was Albert Hoffman.
Ironically, for LSD, you don't need to take off the skin, do you?
Jesus, I remember someone coming in and telling us about how cannabis was this horrible thing that would kill you dead immediately as soon as you touched it.
Yeah. What was the lie?
And then it took me 10 years to realize that cannabis and weed were the same thing. I did not realize for this. I was like, oh my God.
And you've been smoking it for 10 years. I'm like, I must be a superhero. I'm amazing. I've been eating poison for 10 years.
Please do not do drugs, children. Adults, go ahead and do what you want. I don't care. But children, no.
I was wondering whether I might be autistic. And I won't get into the various reasons as to why. But I called the doctor and I'm like, okay, hi. So this is something I'd like to talk about. I've always felt like I felt different in some way, but I never really knew why, because I'm pretty functional and I feel like I might be autistic. And this was started because I was having a conversation in which I felt like I was being perfectly polite. I felt like I was trying to be kind and trying to be good. And I was offending people. Someone said to me, well, Corey said to me, well, people with autism sometimes experience that. Have you ever considered that? And I was like, well, I actually did some tests online, which is not necessarily a perfect test for it, but, and it always came up consistently yeah, maybe. But
yeah, probably. You should get tested.
But it was pretty conclusive actually, those tests. But I called the doctor and I'm like, okay, so this basically happened. It's all sparked. It's all sparked because of these conversations where I was upsetting people. And the doctor, she goes to me, have you considered that maybe you might just be a rude person who's trying to get away with being a rude person by getting an autism diagnosis? And I was
my God.
What? Maybe.
Yeah.
A doctor said
that's why I got my diagnosis, actually. When I was 2 years old, I was such a rude child. My mom was like, she's going to have something as a little bit of a backup. She can't get away with this forever.
Excuse, yeah.
We're gonna need to come up with something so people don't think we're awful people, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah,
to
that
be
was
fair,
that.
A lot of autism parents, that's one of the things that my parents walked into, obviously, raising me and having to take me into public, as you do with your child sometimes. There were always issues of people not understanding quite what was wrong with me and why I was behaving in a certain way. So yeah, it can offer some explanation, but it's not an excuse. I try not to hide behind it. Like, I try to still be aware of my social, like, abilities where possible, because I want to make people feel comfortable. But I mean, it's not my job to seem neurotypical, obviously, and to make people feel comfortable if it is at the expense of my own, like, well-being. But if I can, I still try. And I will be honest, I'm the first person to struggle to converse with sometimes other autistic people.
It is interesting that you mentioned that, and that is something that I wanted to get onto later, so we might bring it up later on. But it's the it seems that some of the, when you look up sort of signs of autism or some problems that people with autism face, which, and I'll get into this in a second, that some of them seem to come not from having autism or being autistic, so much as it's being autistic in a world where autistic people are treated in a particular way, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So a lot of, like, if you're autistic, you have a higher risk of mental illness. So that could also come from just having a really difficult, difficult childhood due to not being sort of raised properly, if that makes sense, right?
Accommodated for.
Exactly.
Not having a support network that really caters to your specific issues.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people have said this, but I think that if we isolated everybody on Earth, nobody would have the diagnosis, because autism symptoms only come into play when you have to either perform certain tasks or interact with other people, or there's pressure from outside. I think there are things that you would have, like, regardless, but you wouldn't be able to, because if you're not comparing it to somebody else, to another person's experience, then there's no issue. Like, the issue only arises when you're not able to keep up with other people. Or clashing with other people because of your specific set of difficulties. So, yeah, it's interesting in that regard. I think most of the real symptoms are based on living in a neurotypical world, so to speak.
So in that paper, I categorized all the qualitative experiences of each participant, and then I gave examples and talked about them. So that paper was actually one of my pandemic babies. It was when it was something I did when I was locked in my house and had nothing to do. I was like, well, of course I'm going to sit here and qualitatively code all of these horrific experiences of people and then write about it. What else would I do?
We're glad you did that, Ramon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And then the second paper, which was really, truly a 100% collaboration between Tim and I, as well as, the important inputs of all the other awesome authors and a graduate student that I have working here too, Madison Swerts. We looked at the quantitative stuff, right? And for better or for worse, the quantitative story is going to be more powerful than the qualitative story in the minds of physicists. But we wanted to make sure that we published on everything. So in this paper, we published on all the quantitative results, but we also backed it up with a lot of the qualitative stories. Before I talk about the last paper, did you want to say anything about these papers, Tim?
I'm just going to sort of say that I think it's important to note this is all from the same data set. Right? So that's sort of a key thing, is that all of these papers sort of stem from the same data set, but we're looking at the same data set in multiple different ways. That I really personally, I'm going to sort of disagree a little bit with Ramon in that, like, I think physicists do tend to like quantitative data, kind of that's sort of how they're programmed, But when I've shown this to other physicists, I found that the mixed methods approach that that Ramon kind of really forced us to adopt, I think that's been so powerful, because I think seeing the quantitative data paired with kind of actual human experiences, that has been really essential for people getting kind of the results of the paper, because it you can show people graphs and that's good, but you have to remember that is actually, several hundred humans' experiences that we're talking about, and kind of getting an insight into what that is sort of really crucial, I think, for the reader, for the listener to kind of understand what's going on.
It's hard to emotionally connect with a graph. Really.
Right, it's like the quantitative data sort of gets you through the hard outer shell of the physicist. And then once you're into the sort of mushy bit on the inside, that you've got the validity of the quantitative data, and you've got through that firewall in the physicist, and then you've got to the mushy inner shell of the physicist, and then you can put your qualitative data in, and then they're like, They're on their back, they're on their belly, the mushy part's exposed, and you can just be like,
yes.
Yeah, it's like you've broken past all the stuff that they might filter out because it's not quantitative. Yeah. And then you've brought the emotion and the human experience in with the qualitative.
Well, I think that's interesting because that's kind of what we tend to do on the podcast. You two have definitely noticed that whenever we do a topic that's like, our sort of trans episodes or even our ADHD episode, we really, really like to get in guests that have personal experience, because data, obviously anecdotal evidence isn't really evidence, but pairing sort of someone's actual experiences with data can be incredibly powerful and also shed new light on the data that you're looking at.
So I love that point. And just to summarize what we were talking about before, or to conclude it.
Paper number 3, Ramon.
Paper number 3. But I want to go back to the anecdote as not data, though, because there's kind of a queer perspective on that.
I have a great quote for this. The quote is, "An anecdote is data if it is recorded."
Fair.
Ooh. Fair. Told
That's
you, Corey.
beautiful.
Go for paper number 3.
Paper number 3, yes. Yeah, we're busy. The reading room, the reading has begun today.
Yes,
so no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I have props because shade is being thrown.
Oh, my Lord.
But paper number 3.
Do you just keep that fan by your desk? Really?
Ready.
I love that.
At all times,
yeah,
ready to go.
I keep a fan at my desk. Yeah. So paper 3 is the purely quantitative paper. So we actually looked at data that we didn't analyze in the previous 2 papers or the report that came out years ago. And in paper 3, we look at the workplace climate of participants and how that influences their consideration to leave as well as their outness. And what was really fascinating about this paper that's coming out, and you're getting the scoop here, is that when we built our statistical models, our regression tables, we actually find that positive climate is a more powerful predictor of staying than negative climate is a predictor of leaving or consideration to leave. So that's a really powerful finding. So that'll be coming out. Hopefully soon. We just submitted the last version of it to the journal. But what that tells us is that a neutral climate is not enough. A neutral climate will drive people away. What we need is an actively positive climate.
Yeah. That's so interesting, because I think I was talking about this maybe on pod, maybe off pod recently. I never remember what I'm saying where. It all blends into one now. This is my life. This is my life. I was saying that this was probably in the late noughties, early 10s, that tolerance was being preached. It was all about tolerance. You need to be tolerant of gay people. You need to be tolerant of people that aren't white. You need to be tolerant of people that are different from you. And I've always thought, bit weird that you just want to tolerate us.
We put up with them.
We'll put up. I will hate you, but I'll be quiet about it. That's just not good enough. And it's really interesting and fantastic to see that sort of you've got data there that reflects that just tolerating a neutral environment isn't enough.
And I think it's not shocking. And I think, again, another thing that's very important about this study is that it has been done by queer people who are also physicists, right? So that's that's absolutely crucial to the design, because we are bringing it's a very wide range of people on the author list. We're bringing the resources that we have from our lived experience to help us interpret this data. So when I think about my own lived experience, when I've been in climates where there are no other gay people, they're not visible, and you're just kind of like, well, how should I act here? Should I, and so generally, kind of, you're trying to pass. Everyone is trying to pass. I think that's what they're doing. You talked about kind of earlier when you're at university, kind of like, what is the game here? What are the codes? And so I think kind of this sort of what I generally refer to as like a chilly climate, one where queer people are not necessarily visible or welcomed. It's not surprising that gives very little traction for retaining people, right? Because you just don't know, is it safe or not? You don't feel particularly welcomed. So I think this finding is really important. But it says it's just not enough to do that. We need to actually build these We need to build a supportive climate.
Absolutely. And I mean, you kind of touched on something there that I think is really interesting, because I doubt you're aware of the goings on of micro internet communities, but there has been
Tell us more.
I assume that you spend not all of your life online like I do, but from doing that, I've gleaned that there are people sort of talking online now about how it doesn't matter your identity. It doesn't matter what your identity is. The only important thing is data. That is the only important thing, and that rubbed me the wrong way slightly, because it was always coming from people who weren't from the marginalized communities that they were talking about. And the reason that they seem to be saying that is because there was pushback about them being the people leading the conversations online in these sort of internet communities. YouTube, I don't know why I'm saying internet communities, YouTube and Twitter, right? That's what I'm talking about. And my thoughts on it were sort of that, yes, there is data, but data isn't sort of king. Data isn't above your own personal bias. Data needs to be interpreted, and who interprets that data and how they interpret it is incredibly important, almost as important as the data itself. Yeah. If you have, say, queer people interpreting the data about queer people, you're probably going to see something slightly different than if you have people from outside that group interpreting the data, and the same if the people that are sort of setting up the studies and running all of this, you know. So I'm glad that you sort of brought you kind of touched on that there.
Yeah, and I would add to that actually that like there's kind of a sort of a persistent myth, I would say, that like data is somehow objective, which isn't really something that philosophy would support. You know, like virtually anybody I think who knows about, you know, it's not, you know, and that science kind of is this sort of objective meritocracy. You know, these are sort of common myths I find people have about science. And you know, when I'm teaching people about data, as I do as a physicist, I think it's very important for people to remember, you know, how is the data collected? Who is collecting the data, you know, and why? And this is equally true for particle physics data as it is for social science data, like the data we're collecting here, right? Because, you know, if you discover that your detector had some weird thing, you know, you need to know that in order to interpret the data properly. Just so kind of knowing who's collecting the data and why is sort of crucial for us here. So it's sort of, data is not a neutral object. It's immersed from some scientific process of inquiry. And, you know, that kind of the kind of the rationale, the collection process is actually fundamental. You can't fully disentangle that from the interpretive process. So that's putting my little philosophy hat on there, but whatever.
Basically what I'm saying here is evolution is complex and messy, and there's lots of different reasons that something can stick around. And when we ask why questions in science, often it's not necessarily the most useful question to answer. Or, sorry, not the most useful question to ask, or even really the easiest question to answer. Why questions, I think, are super difficult in science, right? A what question is usually straightforward. A how question is usually like maybe a little bit more complex, and a why question, dear God, that is because there's so much inference there. You know?
You have to infer a lot.
Yeah,
and I think he enters the realm of, you know, like philosophy and all of like the ethics sometimes, and it depends. There's so much that involves a why. Like, it doesn't have to do with anything that's specifically scientific. It can dwell from everything else.
Absolutely, you're totally right. Absolutely, you can inject your own. You can very much easily inject your own bias into a why question, and that's something I spotted with a lot of what I was looking at, because a lot of this research that has been done on Western populations. Obviously, this is, you're going to see this, it's going to be slightly different for the study we're going to be talking about today when we get to it. But a lot of this study on beards has been done on Western populations, which obviously hair type and beard types are very different between sort of people in the West, say Europeans and North Americans, compared to, say, Native Americans and in Asia, like, you know, sort of the Middle East, Africa, lots of different hair types. You've got you can have very thick curly beards in sort of, I guess, sort of the Middle East and in Africa. But in, say, like Native Americans and I think East Asians and even Europeans, there is less facial hair, or even like, less thick facial hair, right? So there's a lot of variation there. And yeah, these kind of why questions about evolution, particularly about humans, I think especially with humans, are so susceptible to just that little bit of unconscious bias in there. Just like, oh, why did this evolve? Well, we think this about religion, we think this about all these things, and it's so easy to inject that. I mean, what was we were talking about at the end?
We were talking about Ian's paper, which is the sex thing.
Yeah. And so you should go back and listen to that episode if you'd like. It's a great one. But what Ian said last week, what they said was that essentially a lot of research on sex was initially done to sort of push no sex before marriage and to sort of push that whole ideal. Of
course.
There was a lot of bias in it. Yeah. And so sex research initially began as trying to stop people from having sex. And so that's what I mean when we look into sort of this research on humans and a lot of human behavior and even human evolution. I think it's very, very easy to just pop some bias in there. And sometimes it's very obvious. And other times it's a little bit more, I guess, insidious. It's a little bit harder to notice.
I think now you really made me think about it, because you actually talked about the fact that why isn't necessarily something that you can actually explain in evolution. And it made me think about this now in terms of like, why is it that, for example, if I'm not wrong, I don't know if I'm wrong, but like I think Asian people in terms of like China and Japan struggle to grow a beard in terms of like, there's less people that grow a very thick beard in those countries compared to, Middle East or anything like Africa. And I was wondering, like, why would that be? Like, why is it that like different kind of like different areas of the world have different sort of like facial hair dynamics? I'm like,
I have honestly no idea. I think, okay, how about this? I'll give you some stuff that I do know about differences between sort of different, I'm going to say races, and ethnicities, even though like, as we've spoken about on the podcast before, race is like a sort of messy concept that isn't super scientific or biologically sort of relevant. But yeah, so let's say different populations in different areas of the world, right? There are reasons, obviously, for there being some sort of phenotypic differences, as in differences in not just their genes, but how those genes are expressed, what they look like, essentially, right? So skin color, for example, varies generally because of sunlight. So you go farther north, there is less sunlight, and you need to get it, and you get vitamin D from sunlight, so you want to get as much of that sort of UV radiation into your body as possible. I think it's UV radiation. You want to get as much of that sort of sunlight into your body as possible. Lighter skin it helps you do that. In hotter areas, you want darker skin because the melanin protects your basically sort of protects your skin from cancer, essentially. To put it very simply, right? So that's why those changes exist. And then I can't quite remember, but I remember reading the differences. There are obviously differences in hair type. So people from sort of African populations tend to have thicker, curlier, dark hair, whereas people from more European populations, moving up to sort of north, have much thinner, lighter, fairer hair. And off the top of my head, I can't quite remember the reason that was proposed for that. I think it's probably I think it was something to do with the heat and sunlight. Maybe.
Oh, probably protecting the scalp and protecting the brain. That could be part of it from the sun. Yeah.
I think it was to do with protecting the scalp and the brain. I think it was. I think it might have been something to do with it being that one hair type being better at sort of keeping heat out or like letting sweat sort of evaporate off. I can't quite remember off the top of my head.
It might have to do with the same thing. Like how sometimes you see people in the desert, well, a lot of the time, they are wearing loads of clothes and are like really fully covered just because it apparently protects you from the heat, even though like you're technically still like producing a lot of heat yourself. It might be a very similar thing in terms of the hair. It's just like a more coarse, sort of like thick hair probably firstly protects you from the strength of the sun, from like heat stroke and stuff like that, and it might be that as well, like protects you from your shedding your own heat and things like that.
Sure, absolutely. And it's so hard to, and you can. This is what I found really interesting, that you can give this explanation that sounds like super correct. It's a
hypothesis, but
but it's very good. It's a very like sort of astute, good idea, looking at what you know, and saying, oh, maybe it's this. You've given a great hypothesis. Someone else could come along and give a completely different hypothesis that is equally as good, and it's very difficult there because we've got two great hypotheses, but which one is it, right? And when that's the issue with these why questions, that when we're looking at it, it's like, there's a lot of answers to a why, and a lot of those answers could be equally as sort of could seem equally as valid until we look at more information, right? And until we dig in and actually have to sort of disprove some of these answers that we've got to this why question. So
a why question like almost just asks for a story. It almost asks you to like predict the rest of the story. It implies there's like intention there, and you have to infer that intention. Well, there's no intention because evolution doesn't intend anything. It just happens, I guess.
Yeah.
You personify evolution as if it had a will of its own, while actually it's just a bunch of things that scientifically end up sort of like progressing in a certain way. And we human like to find explanations for all sorts of things, including evolution, and be like, but why does this happen? Why are we alive? Why are we like this? And sometimes there's certain things that there is no reason, there is no why, because, or anything. It just is. And for us, it's just a mind-blowing concept that we can't accept.
Luke would always like say awful things to me over Xbox voice chat.
That's funny because Luke says awful things to me now.
He does. He messaged me afterwards and said you should change your username to 5,000 Hawks because that's the midpoint of 10,000 and you're mid. Because you're a gamer.
I'm just going to debunk everything you've said by saying I've never had an Xbox. So you're wrong.
Even worse, you stole your Xbox, Luke? How terrible.
On paper, you've never legally owned an Xbox. But according to the police report.
I made the choice before I started this episode. I did not want to turn this into a true crime podcast. I'm not going to sit and talk about John Wayne Gacy or, Jeffrey Dahmer for the entire time because I don't find that remotely interesting.
Let's go into grisly details of somebody's murder.
It's a couple guys, it's a few blokes that murdered horribly a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's terribly worthwhile to spend a lot of time getting into the heads of such a small group of criminals. You know what I mean? Like there are better ways to spend our time, and also dragging, families' trauma out into the open is just a horrible thing to do.
Well, that literally exact thing happened to me. Like my cousin was very brutally murdered like 10 years ago, and like Sky News were trying to make, Sky were trying to make a documentary about it, all that, blah blah blah. It was on the news, it was on TV, like everywhere. Like you can Google it, and it's pages and pages and pages. But I found a few podcast episodes about it, and I was like, whoa, these people don't really think about how they're impacting people's lives. Because it's one thing doing like a true crime episode about like somebody whose family member like died like 200 years ago, and there's like. And, like, there's a difference between that and, like, people doing it for stuff that happened recently where their families are still, like, dealing with the aftermath of it.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. It's really, especially with a serial killer, right? Because with serial killings, it's kind of, it separates itself from other murders, where a lot of murders are from people that you know, right? Like that's one of the most common things. You're murdered by someone that you know. It's not a common thing to be murdered by someone that you know. It's common in murders for the.
That's one of the most common things.
It happens to us all.
You know that feel when you're murdered by someone you know?
There's being murdered by somebody you know.
A lot of murders are committed by, someone that knows the victim, whereas serial killings kind of diverge from that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because of the nature of that kind of crime. And what's really mad to me is that we not exactly venerate these serial killers, but just like a little bit we kind of do, right? And
way more than any other crime.
No, exactly, right?
It's not like, wow, what's the psychology of bank robbers?
But that's way more interesting to me.
The psychology of bank robbers.
I mean, the psychology of bank robbers, that's just how we get, what is it called? Stockholm Syndrome, which doesn't even exist, right? It's like, oh, well, how could you like a criminal that's kidnapped you whilst they're robbing a bank? Maybe because they're actually not as bad as the police, But the point here is that with serial killers, it's one of those things where it's a lot. If you start bringing up the crimes of a serial killer, it's a lot of people who are kind of unrelated to the killer, but who have been victims of them, and it's a lot of families that are being reminded of probably the worst day in their life, and they don't. There's no closure because it's just, I guess, a senseless killing. They matched probably maybe a profile. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And they ended up getting murdered by someone who murders a lot of people.
And it's also interesting because, like, in terms of, like, true crime and that kind of stuff, when they're reporting on, like, serial killers, it's not like they're if it was like a single murder, they'd go into the family and like what the person was like. But when it comes to serial killers, you're just like a data point. Like if somebody has killed like 20 people, they're not going to give each victim the amount of respect that like they all deserve. It's just like, oh, so he killed this guy and then this guy and then this guy and then this guy.
I guess it's kind of what you've just said there, Corey, is that like it's just random, wrong place, wrong time. It's kind of like it's kind of like how reporting on terrorism is so captivating when it happens, because exactly why what you've just said, because it's like you can't spot it. Yeah. Like you could be like just going about your day. I sometimes get this moment where I'm like on a tube platform, or I'm like sitting outside at a restaurant on like a normal evening, and I'm like, oh my God, this is what it was like for like the people in the Paris attacks. Yeah. They were just sitting like this, and then suddenly they were dead. Yeah. Like that's so boggling to your mind, because you can't possibly compute it, and you can't possibly try to foresee it in the way that you could try to spot if somebody in your friendship group is really aggressive, or try to spot if someone you're friends with has this condition where they don't have empathy, or like trying to spot things like that, which are actually like, you know, oh, I can do that. I can do some thinking about it. But if it's like, oh, you could be on a train. Yeah, and that's it.
I mean, if we talk about the Zodiac Killer, it's, I'm going out for lunch with my boyfriend. Oh, I'm sitting in the car. Oh, I'm doing this. Oh, I'm doing that. Like, yeah, it's just, you have no control over it. And it is, so it is a little bit more of a scary thing there. Obviously, it's super, super uncommon, like entirely. It's not something you should be staying up at night about. But yeah, and I mean, kind of bringing it back to the true crime people. I mean, Noah, you said there that, you know, when it's serial killers, they wouldn't necessarily give all the victims the respect they deserve. But like, that's assuming that these people that sort of do true crime do give any respect to the victims at all. I mean, and I think this is important to talk about, right? I mean, I kind of wanted to bring this up during this episode, because I tried to look into the sort of parasocial relationships that surround serial killers, because yes, people have parasocial relationships with serial killers. Of course they do. You're not going to make a Jeffrey Dahmer show where you've got a stone cold hottie playing Jeffrey Dahmer.
Evan Peters and like Zac Efron.
Yeah. Why are you casting leading men to play these roles? Why are they so charismatic? Why is that the story that we're told? Oh yeah, serial killers are charismatic men that use their charming good looks and whatnot. No, they're not. Not in all cases. Sometimes they're just a dude who is getting away with a lot of murders. Okay? Sensationalizing this, romanticizing this, having a parasocial relationship with someone who just kills people is so messed up. And honestly, true crime absolutely plays into that in a lot of ways, because it sensationalizes, it romanticizes to some extent, and it also desensitizes people to these crimes. One thing I'll say about true crime, I'm going on a mini rant here, we'll be done in just a sec, I'm sorry everyone. One thing about true crime is either change your name to murder porn or something similar that makes it very clear that you don't actually care about crime, you just care about talking about gruesome, grisly murders. Or start covering other crimes, because hey, there are interesting crimes. I want to hear about fraud. I want to hear about identity theft. I want to hear about bank robberies. All of those things are really bloody interesting. Why is it always murders with you people? It's because you have some sick obsession with murder. Oh my God.
Do you know what I can smell right now? The comments of people being like, well, actually, true crime can be really helpful for solving mysteries, because actually putting out all this information into the world means that the normal people, the power will be put into their hands, and then they'll solve the crimes, and also they're respecting the victims.
Yeah, sure. I love unqualified people who don't understand the first thing about forensics, thinking that they are actually making any changes when they read something from Murderpedia. I love it when white women talk about the trauma of people of marginalized identities for fun. And before you try and point out the one or two true crime people that you know that aren't white women, most of them are white women. Okay, and that's not an insult to white women in general. I'm just saying that maybe it's a bit weird that that this group of white people are focusing quite heavily on the trauma of a group that they don't necessarily exactly belong to.
Yeah, especially like the Jeffrey Dahmer stuff. Like, people really gloss over the fact that like the majority of his victims were like young black men. Gay black men.
Yeah, so true crime, I mean, look, it definitely, I think you can see how it plays into a lot of this sort of serial killer stuff, especially just through the sort of desensitization, right? And I mean, we talk about parasocial relationships. We've done an episode on parasocial relationships with Shaba, which was absolutely fantastic. One of my favorite episodes that we've ever done. And we could talk for days genuinely about parasocial relationships, because I don't think we consider how much they influence our lives, because you have a parasocial relationship with Ted Bundy, you have a parasocial relationship with Jeffrey Dahmer, I have a parasocial relationship with the bloody Zodiac Killer, because Zodiac is one of my favorite films, and I think I think that whole concept is very interesting, despite the fact that it's a horrific series of murders, right? Like, my point here is that we need to be maybe a little bit more careful, a little bit more conscious, and a little bit more cautious about the way that our brains will sort of attach themselves to or sort of create relationships with people that we interact with in the media, right? Whether those people be real people, fictional people, serial killers, or anything else. If you see someone on a screen, or if you read about someone, or if anything like that happens, you're going to start a little relationship in your head with them. And you need to be on top of that. Because, yes, being a crazy fan who thinks they're best friends with Dan and Phil when in actuality they've never met them and Dan and Phil do not know or care about who they are is one thing. But being someone who has a weird obsession with serial killers and murderers and thinks that it's all right because it's quirky and kooky and they know that these things are horrible and, oh, look how desensitized I am, that is as bad, if not much, much worse.
Yeah, I feel like people just need to be a bit more self-aware about why they're consuming the content that they consume. Because if they want to watch true crime, like, fine, like, go ahead. But my issue with it is just people being like, oh no, I'm doing it for this reason, and it's actually fine. It's like, it's not, but like, go ahead.
Well, I mean, the thing is, ethical true crime, sure. Yeah. I mean, if there's consent from the families, if they're involved in it, sure. Yeah. But that's something you rarely find from podcasts and YouTube, because they're taking it from other sources.
It's hard to do that properly when you're doing a brand deal.
Oh no, exactly. Especially, like, it's hard to do that properly when you're selling murder merch, right? Like, I mean, you have a very, not a very unique experience, but you have a very uncommon experience of being someone who is very closely related to a story that is covered on true crime things. I mean, would you like to use this platform? Would you like to stand up on your soapbox and say how you feel about that specifically?
It's just weird. Like, because I remember, like, obviously I remember when my cousin died. Like, she was, like, murdered, and it was bad, and it was, like, on the radio.
It's a horrible murder,
for, like, weeks and weeks and weeks. And, like, it's just weird, like, seeing that in an episode, because, like, that's like my family. Yeah. And I remember like how my cousins reacted to it and like how my dad reacted to it. And I remember going to the funeral and all that stuff. And it's like such a personal thing. And for people to be making just like, it's just like murder porn. And it's always quite lighthearted as well.
It's very detached.
Yeah,
right?
It's very detached. It's weird. They don't see these people as people. They just see them as like cool little data points and like little stories.
I understand the sort of need to sort of lighten the tone, because it is horrible. Whenever we talk about really heavy stuff on this podcast, we do try and lighten it a bit.
Yeah.
But the difference between us covering, say, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, or covering any other number of horrible things that have happened to people throughout history, in the name of science, is that we're not covering it because we enjoy it.
Yeah.
We cover so many different stories, and sometimes we take on these really difficult ones because it's very important for you to know those. Is it important for you to know about every single murder that's happened in the past 50 years? I don't think so.
It's also very unlikely that somebody would listen to an episode about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and then be like, ooh, I want to be an irresponsible scientist. Exactly. Whereas people covering terrorist attacks and mass shooting attacks and probably serial killings inspires other ones because they're so venerated and so admired. We're measuring the degree to which animals respond to pain stimuli in a similar way to humans respond to pain stimuli.
I mean, what is sentience and consciousness if not that, essentially? You know what I mean? Like, what is our estimation of sentience and consciousness if not a sort of like view of how similar to us other things are, especially when we talk about intelligence, right? So you look at you look at like a measure of intelligence, it's tool use. Oh, crows are very smart because they can use tools. Oh, octopuses are very smart because they can use tools. But ultimately, why is that a positive trait that we are looking for? Do you know what I mean? In some sense, the best way to sort of rank or view organisms is based on how good they are at continuing life.
Yeah. Because you could absolutely, over the course of a few million years, evolve the ability to recognize a tool and use it as an automatic response. If it, for example, it's a stone, because like intelligence in terms of using a tool, like me using a hammer, like I don't have any code within my brain that knows how to recognize. Like I wasn't born with code to recognize a hammer and use a hammer. So it's kind of, to a certain extent, it's a measure of intelligence because I have had to build a model post-birth of a hammer and what effect the hammer has and how I use that hammer. But 10 million years from now, we could have, it is technically possible, as long as hammers continue to exist in the environment, we could selectively, like over the course of millions and millions of years, selectively breed for recognizing hammers as early as possible after birth and being able to use them. So a crow or a spider or something could be able to recognize a stone and use a stone to break something in a non-intelligent way, i.e. could be a behavioral pattern that the eyes picks up the general shape of a stone and in the case of a spider, the little sort of spidery arm grabs the stone and bangs against something without that being something it has learned and picked up post-birth. I guess that feels why we use tool use to be a measure of intelligence, but that might be wrong.
I think, well, yeah, I guess. I mean, yeah. If what you're saying is that we use tool use as a measure of intelligence because it requires problem solving, essentially, right?
All I mean is that it could be non-intelligent. Like the use of a coconut as a shelter for an octopus could be a behavior that the octopus is born with, as opposed to a behavior the octopus gains throughout its
like
lifespan. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But I think the key point is that it is the intelligence is the gaining of like that. Intelligence I think is really more the elasticity to be able to engage in new environments and sort of again, problem solving is the key word here, right? Because it is the ability to use information to gain access to something or to protect oneself from something in new in novel ways.
Yeah, ways that you aren't born with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Rather ways, I mean, you say ways that you aren't born with. Yeah, sure. But maybe also ways that you aren't like explicitly taught
yes,
through sort of parenting, right? Because like,
yeah,
I'm pretty sure that I could probably come up with like a hammer. Not like specific, like, but you know, like the idea of hitting something with something else. Pretty sure I can figure that one out. You know, even if I hadn't been taught about it, I'm pretty sure I could probably figure out. There's a lot of things you could probably figure out if you weren't taught them. And what's interesting about humans is that we've gone to this point of like, we have taken this idea of like raising young and teaching young to an extreme degree, wherein there is so much knowledge that we just shove into people's heads from the age of like, kids know about planets. Why? How? What?
Yeah.
Weird.
Like kids know about fire and that it is dangerous and that it is hot and it can cook things and it can get rid of things. The kids know about like water and like all the uses for that. Kids know about saws. Kids know about hammers and nails and screwdrivers and all of these different things that like, if any one person had to figure it all, like think about every single bit of scientific knowledge that we've got. If any one person had to figure it all out, they could not. We'd be starting back from the start again.
And also if we lost all the knowledge and started again, we wouldn't automatically have it. Like not like we are born fundamentally the same as we were born thousands of years ago. It's just that we have a constant store of. We have all the information to quickly download all the stuff we've learned.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not so sure if we are born exactly the same as we were thousands of years. I won't go out on a limb and say that. But
what I mean is, we're not born able to do nuclear physics.
Yeah.
So if we were born without any nuclear physics, it would take us all that time to re-figure it out again.
Oh gosh, I can't remember what this was. It was someone asked the question: how far back can you go, and take someone out of time before they wouldn't be able to engage in human society appropriately? And I think like there were some Neanderthals who could exist in human society, but would have like a noticeably low IQ.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Sure.
But it's really interesting. So what you're saying there is something that I find really interesting. So you wouldn't think about this, right? But like, you could go back in time. You could pluck Cleopatra, and you could probably teach her how to drive. Now, right? That seems weird.
She don't have chariots.
Weird.
Yeah, but what I mean is driving a car and driving a chariot, or do you know what I mean? They're very different things.
I couldn't drive a chariot.
No, but you could learn, right? So
probably, yeah.
You could pull someone out of time, and you could pull people out of time for a lot, like way, way, way back, even though you think of them as being like not as intelligent or not as knowledgeable, you could pull someone at a time and say, okay, now here is all of the scientific knowledge we have. Here's how to drive a car, and they could integrate into society. The difficulty, like if you were to steal a baby from, like, I don't know, like 5,000 years ago,
yeah,
I reckon you could probably raise it as a.
They could do some of the jobs,
yeah, absolutely. You know, and that's insane. Feels very weird because we think of like what you're saying. We think of it as being that sort of knowledge as being static.
Like we have progressed, but actually the knowledge has progressed.
Yeah.
We have changed a bit, but
We
not
just
as
have to
much
catch
as the
up
knowledge
quicker.
has changed.
Yeah.
But that's what brains are for, isn't it? Is they're good at downloading information that the body and brain, like a brain is like a general purpose thing.
That's it. Yeah. It's a general purpose. It's what you say. You're able to learn to do things that you weren't born with. And what I wanted to sort of interject was that, well, I mean, technically you're born with the ability to do that, if that makes sense.
But I mean, only in the same way as I'm currently, I was born as a baby with the potential to do stuff that hasn't been discovered yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I mean is, like, your brain is built to be able to learn to do those things, but it's not built to be able to do those things. So in the sense that a spider is built to produce webs, not just physically, but also sort of like, it's more sort of hardwired into them to make webs.
Yeah.
You can do that. You can just learn to do it. I'll just learn to make a web. That's fine. I'll do that. In the same way that, like, a sort of kangaroo boxes. I don't think a kangaroo necessarily learns how to sort of, like, you know, do it sort of thing.
It might observe its parents boxing.
Sure, yeah. But then, like, I can watch a kangaroo and learn to do what the kangaroo does, and also learn any number of martial arts.
Yeah.
You can just do that. Swimming. Humans can't swim, but we can. We can't innately swim. We can't innately ride a bike, but we can just...
It's actually a really good leveler in terms of, like, if you're looking at somebody who's incredibly good at something, yes, they may have been born with a slightly different body or brain, so they are particularly adept at a specific skill, but a decent chunk of their ability is just practice for a very long time. So if you're looking at someone and going, oh man, I wish I could do that, well, they couldn't at some point, and you probably, if you were plonked into their life with your brain and your set of skills, you'd probably be quite good at it too.
You know, there's always been this joke of, if I am interested in a woman, she is not straight. Yes. Almost entirely without fail, that woman is not straight. Thus far, I think a bunch of the celebrities that I've had crushes on that were women have come out. Like, it gets to be a problem. It's like almost a gaydar, like accidentally. And I realized
so if Corey crushes on you, then you might find something out about yourself down the line if you don't already know.
I can just tell. I know.
It's like a litmus test, Corey.
So no, but the realization came that I was kind of looking at the links between all of those women, and I realized, oh, it's just the masculinity, and it makes sense because if you're a queer woman, you're probably more comfortable in expressing masculinity than someone who may not be queer.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting how attraction works, because yes, I'm attracted to this trait, and I'm also attracted to this trait in women, and that is the through line of my attraction to women. But it's still an attraction to women. It's not necessarily women that sort of, you know, look masculine or have masculine features. It's a masculine sort of energy thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, they can still look feminine. They can still dress entirely feminine. Like, that is not the issue. It is... It's like that sort of energy. It's so odd how we simplify sexuality and orientation down to just generally a selection of maybe 5 words when everyone is so different. Like, you know, I mean, I'm not going to be the same as the next bisexual person. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In terms of who or what I'm attracted to.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many different like types of ways of being bisexual, because I know people who are more attracted to like masculine or feminine or androgyny, but then I'm not that way. Like, for me, it's kind of like a blind, like, oh, I just like what I perceive to be beautiful, and there's not really like a pattern. But for some people, there is a pattern. And so just to put it all under the category of bisexual, sometimes it's not as useful to just put it all under this one giant umbrella. And sometimes it is, but sometimes it doesn't capture all that complexity.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, this is what I'm so often talking about when it comes to categories, and I feel like that meme of Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny, with like looking at the sort of conspiracy board behind it,
like strings going
like categories. But this is what I'm talking about with categories. Categories are there to make things easier to understand because our stupid dumb monkey brains can only think of so much at once.
Yes.
So instead of thinking about every individual human on the planet, it's just not possible. We gotta put them into little groups, and those groups can be incredibly useful if, for example, like a label wherein I'm like, I want to find more people that are similar to me, and people with the same label can have similar experiences, so that can be very useful. But when you start to use said label to say that these experiences are all the same, you then start to lose the nuance, and that is something inherent in a category or a group like that. There's a lack of nuance. Yeah. And sometimes that's useful. Like, losing nuance for, sort of workability is very useful sometimes and absolutely necessary. But other times you want that nuance back. And this is what I so often notice, is that people seem to think that homosexuality and bisexuality and heterosexuality all exist objectively, and they don't. They don't. They're just group names that we've used to describe generally how people interact with one another. That's it.
And the thing you've just talked about there is something I hope that the sort of education system moves towards, because we have, like, we talked on the podcast before about how we essentially have like a Victorian education system. And that's one argument that you can make about the education system, right? I'm not an educator. I don't know everything about it, but we live in an education system where a lot of your ability to pass exams is your ability to memorize things.
Yes.
Well, you don't need to memorize things anymore. You can ask Siri things, like you can ask Google things, right? You don't need, obviously memory is important, and being able to recall stuff that's relevant to your line of work. Yeah, great. But there are more important things about like the way you learn things, like metacognition and understanding that categories aren't real, and understanding how language affects your perception of the world. And those are things that we need to educate on too. And we spend such a tiny amount of time, if ever. I didn't realize that the like about modeling and about how categories work and about how you simplify things until much later after my education. And I found that really annoying and frustrating when I learned it. And I went, I was taught a load of useful but not true things, but I wasn't ever taught that they were useful but untrue things. I had to figure that out for myself, and I was flipping furious when I found it out. I was so angry.
Yeah, I understand that rage, because I have spoken about this a number of times on the podcast. I experienced that in school when in biology, every single year, they would tell us what they had lied about. And it drove me up the wall. I think I managed to maybe get to fourth year or fifth year of high school before I turned to the teacher on the sort of first day, and I was like, "What did you like?" I was like, "What are you lying about this year? Yeah. Tell me.
Go on, tell me what I've got
Tell
wrong.
me what you're lying about." And he was like, "Look, it's more complex." And I'm like, "I don't care. I want to know what the lies are, so I'm prepared for next year. All right, I'm not dealing with this again. You can't be doing it." Because they give you simpler models as a child because it's easier for you to understand, and it's useful because it helps you understand that concept. Yeah. And it is perfectly viable for all of the things that you want, all of the things that you might want to do. Mm-hmm. In the same sense that in my day-to-day life, I don't need to know about quantum mechanics. I genuinely, I will never ever need to know about that in my day-to-day life. Newtonian physics, though, kind of bloody useful a lot of the time, right? Understanding that, very useful. Understanding quantum mechanics, don't care. I don't need to. Doesn't exist. Yeah. Cat's dead, cat's alive.
Whatever. You know that you don't know about quantum mechanics. So if there was some quantum phenomena come up, because you have a model of your own lack of knowledge, right? Yeah. You have a model that the models you have are wrong. And so if there was some quantum phenomenon going on, and a quantum physicist came along and was like, "I know what I'm on about, you don't," you would be able to get that. Whereas we've talked before on the podcast about it's simple high school biology argument when it comes to like vaccination, when it comes to immunity, when it comes to illnesses, when it comes to, and we're not, and it's so frustrating because people weren't taught the stuff they were being taught was a simplification, and I just, oh man, it fills me with no end of rage. I told this banker about this once. I was chatting to a banker. Weird thing to have a chat about with a banker, but he said that basically you'd have to upend the entire educational system if you wanted to do that. And that made me go, cool, let's do it. That's not a reason to not do it.
I've been poly for 6 years or so. I've had a lot of people in my life who have come and who have gone, who have like, I've talked to them about polyamory, and they've gone, oh, that sounds really interesting. I want to give that a go. Or like, me and my partner want to give that a go, and stuff like that. And invariably, when people just view it as, oh, we can just be romantically or sexually involved with whoever we want, and let's just be free, invariably it becomes a problem, because they're not necessarily communicating. They're still viewing this, as Corey's been saying, like viewing it from a monogamous, through a monogamous lens of like, for example, I've known people who have started being polyamorous or opened their relationship up in some sort of poly capacity, and then been anxious about telling their partner that they are sort of romantically or sexually attracted to, or even involved with another person, because in their head they're like, oh, but what if that makes them uncomfortable, and what if they consider that cheating and stuff like that. And so rather than having that conversation and kind of having that confrontation and that potential uncomfortability, they then just go, I simply won't say anything. And then the relationship explodes. Yeah. Because if you don't talk to your partner, regardless of if you're monogamous or polyamorous or in a anarchistic polyamorous commune, good for you if you are, and that's working out for you. Love to you. You've got to communicate. It's the basis. You've got to get communication. You've got to get consent.
And I think the fact that most people, this is something that I'm not basing this on research I've read. This is squarely my opinion based on my experiences and blah blah blah. Okay, the disclaimer's done. Okay, I'm going to say what I think now. So I feel that most people fall back on the fact that they are in traditional relationships as an excuse to not have conversations with each other that they might need to have. So people aren't necessarily as communicative as they need to be about their feelings or anything in the relationship, because they're basically just following a standard sort of model of how relationships go, right? They just have assumptions and expectations, and they don't bring up when there are problems. I feel like that's why you see a lot of jokes from straight men that hate their wives, because
so many jokes.
Why did you marry her if you don't like spending time with her?
When she talks,
it's like, or people that are like, my husband never does anything romantic for me. Have you communicated it to him in a way that he understands? Or have you asked him why he's not able to do that for you? Yeah. And if all of these things are the case, why did you marry a man that doesn't fulfill your needs? Like, just speak to people.
That's what I'm supposed to do. That's my job.
You even see this when it comes to sort of sexual relationships as well. You know, people just don't know how to have sex with each other. Yes. For both of them to enjoy it. It's actually
speak for yourself.
Shocking.
Oh, sorry. It was right there.
Sorry, who's people?
A friend of mine, someone that was speaking to someone very close to me, who I won't name. Definitely not me.
Asking for a friend.
Sorry. But no, I genuinely think that relationships would be better served by more open communication, which is why I think a lot of relationships are pretty poor. Why divorce rates are probably so high.
My wife had a very funny interaction. So me and my wife have each other on Find My Friend, so that we know when each other are home or like that kind of thing. And this guy was like, she was like watching me on the map when she was with this guy. I was coming to pick her up, and she was like, oh, he'll be here in a couple of minutes. And this guy was like, oh, that's really creepy. And she was like, why? We trust each other. She's like, oh, when you get married, that'll end. Don't worry. He'll be wanting to stay late at the office, and he'll be wanting to say he's staying late at the office, but actually he's at the pub with his friends. And I was like, firstly, you don't know me at all. But I don't have an office. I don't go to the pub with my friends. Rarely I do, and if I do, my wife's there. But he was like, that'll end when you get married. Well, that man's divorced now.
And I feel that the closest you've got to being at the office, and also going for drinks with your friends is SCI Guys. Yeah. And whenever you want to stay here after SCI Guys, you call your wife to ask her permission.
And she's always like, yes. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm allowed to make decisions. Fantastic.
I've had conversations with people with ADHD who are like, "Oh, I completely understand your autism struggles because I'm ADHD, so we're basically the same." And I'm like, "No, we're not the same at all." And I always kind of struggle because, like, I don't want to invalidate their experience and the fact that they identify, with neurodivergent struggles and identify that as a disability. But at the same time, I'm like, it is a very different thing. And maybe they're autistic as well. Maybe they're just relating to me because they're undiagnosed autistic. But at the same time, I do want to, like, I hate to be the gatekeeper of this, but I get a little, and I'm trying not to be gatekeepy about it, but I am apprehensive about just even that self-diagnosis and everything like that. It's such a complex issue. It's because you said as well, like, oh, get diagnosed by a doctor. And I used to say that. It's like, no, just get diagnosed, because you can't do that. You can't do that by yourself, and you can't put that on yourself. But it's still like a luxury to be able to get diagnosed, of course, as well. So
absolutely,
it's such a tricky subject, because I want people to have access to proper diagnosis, and I don't want people to feel, because self-diagnosing and trying to treat yourself and reading up about the very limited information that there is out there about autism can be really, really harmful. I know a lot of people that got freshly diagnosed even by a doctor and read up harmful information, got stuck into thinking about themselves in a certain way. Like I didn't even read stuff online, and I just got harmed by the limited information that even people in treatment centers have about autism, because I had a very limited view about what autism meant, and I thought that I was completely broken and I wouldn't be able to do certain things, or I wouldn't be able to trust my own brain sometimes because I was told, oh no, your experience is completely different from other people. So in my brain, especially when I was younger, I was like, oh, then that means that I can't trust my brain to understand anything that's going on in the world, because, like, if I can't have somebody else's feedback from the outside saying, or being able to look through their eyes, it's like trying to explain to a blind person what the color blue is. Like, if I just have a very limited experience, and if I'm being told, oh no, it's completely different because you're autistic, then how am I supposed to trust anything, So it can be really dangerous. And I think self-diagnosis is valuable, but tricky.
So when I say get diagnosed, I mean, I should clarify, I don't mean, like, obviously I understand that not everyone has access to diagnosis. My point is more, don't watch a few TikToks and then assume. Self-diagnosis is obviously the first step to diagnosis if it's available to you. You literally cannot go for a diagnosis usually unless you think to yourself, I think I might have this thing, which realistically is a form of self-diagnosis. So what I mean is, don't just watch a TikTok from some kid telling you that they read that actually these two things are the same thing, and be like, oh, well then I'm just ADHD. Don't do that. Like, if you can get diagnosed, seek a diagnosis. And if you can't get diagnosed, then it is a little bit more complex. And I'm not really going to be the one to give you the advice here, but I would say that saying that I really think I am autistic, and then going on to then create content for other autistic people is maybe not the way to go, because you honestly probably don't know what you're talking about. You can always talk about your experience, but then to sort of label yourself as a certain thing, and then sort of intertwine your experience with the experience of this group of people is maybe not the best way forward, right?
Out of interest, what do you think is causing the fact? I mean, maybe this is just my TikTok, but there's so much. I get recommended so much like ADHD and autism content on TikTok.
Also do I.
And I wonder, like, is this the algorithm doing it, or is it people realizing they might have, for example, undiagnosed ADHD, and it being more prevalent than maybe was thought? Or is it just, for some reason, the algorithm is finding that suggesting to people who maybe have some level of attention trouble that they might have ADHD causes them to watch loads of TikTok videos about ADHD.
You're spot on. Sorry, the problem with the algorithm is that it's a self-selecting thing, right? Like, you choose, the algorithm doesn't decide to serve you anything. you watch something for a certain period of time or engage with it, and the algorithm is basically saying, oh, well, other people that engage with this other stuff. Maybe this person will engage with this stuff too. I'll test it out. Like so often on TikTok recently, I've got a single audio. I've got a TikTok audio, and then I swipe to the next TikTok, and it's that same audio, and I'm like, are you stupid algorithm? Are you really trying to test whether I care about this audio that I spent some time on? No, I was washing my hands and I couldn't get my phone screen wet. But like, yeah, like it's. I think it's basically like people engaging with content because they find it engaging, and that just kind of leads them down that path because a lot of other people that engage with that content also find it engaging, and people want answers for why they are the way they are.
Yeah.
So if you find something that is generally kind of relatable, you know, like, oh, sometimes I struggle to make a to-do list. If you find that relatable, and then, you know, you then get like sort of fed content that says, if you struggle to make to-do lists, you have ADHD, then you're going to start thinking that, when realistically having ADHD is a bit more than just sometimes struggling with to-do lists,
so
right?
It's the focus problems to self-diagnosing ADHD pipeline.
it's the relatable.
It is the same thing, because I immediately thought when you mentioned this, it's the tweet where somebody goes, "Why are all of these trans women on my Twitter?" It says "men about to find out why" or something. It's like, why are all these autistic people on my TikTok? They're like neurotypical person.
LSD is what we're talking about today, isn't it? Do you know what LSD stands for? Anyone?
Lucy. No, what is something sciencey? I really regret starting to talk there. I felt like I hadn't said anything for a while.
So what you were going to say?
I was so happy that you.
So
I'm so happy you jumped in.
What I think Matt was going to say.
Something philophate or something. Diaphyllate.
Yeah.
You know, it'll be something sciencey like listenine, stilified. Dysnacylate.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So close. Well, is that what
is that?
Sorry, do go on.
You got to give him a partial credit for that. I come on.
Oh, do you know what?
Lucinine, dasinine, nanolate.
Well, I was going to take the Lucy. Say that's spot on. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Well, yeah, that's a really. I was going to say that's really funny because like the Beatles wrote Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and then they were just like, "That's not about LSD. It's a magical story about Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds." And ignore the fact that we've been doing loads of LSD recently.
Just a coincidence. Well, if you want to know more about LSD, you could check out Lucy on the Bike with Diamonds, which is episode number 7 of SCI Guys.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, we did that one early. But yeah, LSD stands for lysergic acid diethylamide, which is pretty close to what you said.
That's what I said.
Yeah, more or less, yeah. If you say it fast, it sounds exactly the same. Just to give you a quick overview of LSD, it was accidentally synthesized by Albert Hofmann in 1943, I believe. He was trying to make sort of experimental substances to basically make circulatory and respiratory stimulants, uppers, essentially.
I mean, I'm glad you said that. He wasn't trying to make a pot roast or something. Gone absolutely. Oh no.
I really messed this one up, man.
Nan's come round for the weekly Sunday lunch. Oh no.
Do you know what? The actual original story, he did mess up a lot in that when he first sort of made it, he thought, okay, well, I need to test this out. He tested it out on animals first, and then he was like, okay, well, I need to test this out on a human.
These animals are having a great time.
But he did not know the dosage. You know this, Luke.
Yeah.
He did not know the dosage, so he took maybe like 10 to 100 times what.
Well, didn't the first time he like dropped it on his finger by accident, and then it went into his bloodstream through his finger.
That was it.
And then he also then didn't know what doses to take, so he just took a stupendous dose.
Yeah,
because it get in through his finger. Did he have no skin on his finger or something?
Just exposed veins.
Holy shit.
Yeah, he blew the skin off his finger in a previous experiment. No, LSD is mad. So you sort of take it, you could take it in capsules or in sort of tablet form if you're taking it, I guess, medically. If you're taking it less than legally, usually it will be on a strip of paper. And it can just absorb through your skin and get into your bloodstream that way. And it is incredibly potent. I mean, you need a tiny, tiny amount, per unit of body weight to get you
how
really
big was
tripping.
Albert Hofmann's finger? He's absorbing 100 times a regular dose through one finger.
I mean,
it's incredible.
You could genuinely. So I've been looking into this. You could genuinely fit enough dosage for one person on a sort of piece of paper smaller than your little fingernail. Yeah.
And when you say looking into it, what do you mean?
Look, Dave, I'm not gonna lie. In preparation for this, I did a ton of acid. I'm still up right now, to be honest.
Fantastic.
As long
we
as you're
appreciate
wearing a
the
white
dedication.
coat and you're noting down the data, then you're all good. Or data, I think you say. Is that right?
I say data, yeah.
Nazis, data.
It's fascinating, like the change we're going to see. Like the change we're going to see in the world when you can summon your car to come pick you up from the train station. Things like that. Like that's going to a certain extent, affect things like the housing market. If you're, because no longer, like the area around for example, a train station that will then be valuable slightly widens because you don't have to pay for parking, you don't have to pay for a taxi. You can summon your car.
Yeah.
Your car can follow you via GPS on your phone, predict when you're going to be at the train station and come and get you.
So
like,
cool.
That's incredible.
It's like calling an Uber, but it's your car, essentially.
Yeah, well, and the reality is that it's very possible that most people won't own cars.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Ubers will just be so cheap that you just don't bother owning a car.
Exactly. There'd be a cycling system of, there's just maybe, one car between, say, 4 people, like a family or whatever, that kind of sort of density. And whenever you need a car, you just hit the car button on your phone. Car comes and picks you up, takes you where you want to go.
And it is a little bit like dystopian. So there's that is it World Economic Forum idea of you will own nothing and you will be happy, about this like future world where ownership will be less common for things like a car.
Well, yeah, I think,
which some people have turned into a conspiracy theory. But the thing about that is, like, if you think about how much space on the Earth is taken up by cars that are currently not being driven.
Yeah.
Like, to think about the transformation when we had cars, where now, like, every street, if we looked out the window of your house, every single space outside of every single house has a car on most British roads, which is absolutely ridiculous, the amount of space we dedicate to not currently being used cars.
And what's difficult as well is that British roads are narrow. They're not like American roads that have been built to be big and wide and they've used up all the space. They're narrow as all hell. And when you have a car on either side, they become even narrower. And it becomes like less safe driving. It's very difficult to drive down my road. You know what I mean? Compared to a road literally anywhere else, because you've got to, like, if you've got another car coming up, it's like, okay, well, how are we going to pass each other? You know what I mean? And it would make things more efficient. But I think a point to hit on is that we think of self-driving cars as being, okay, yeah, personal Uber for everyone, but also just a self-driving bus. Do you know what I mean? A self-driving shuttle that goes to like, this could revolutionize sort of public transport as well, right? Which would be incredible. Imagine if public transport was so cheap because, it was just autonomous. There you go, running along. And, it was electric as well, let's say. And, I'm just making trams. Never mind. I'm making automated trams. Never mind. This is the thing with self-driving cars, though. I mean, the technology is fantastic. It can be used for, like, very specific sort of tasks, like sort of truck driving or, say, bus driving or driving a tour bus for, musicians or whatever, right? You could have it do all of these different sorts of things, right? But also, a lot of these problems can be solved by public transport. And this separation between self-driving, like autonomous vehicles, and using them in sort of more, I guess, sort of socialisty sort of ways, there's this weird barrier between those two things, right?
Yeah, socialism.
Kind of on that, I found a line in a paper that I thought was absolutely horrifying and I absolutely needed to bring to the podcast today. So let me just read this out for you. It was talking about the impact that self-driving cars could have on society, the positive benefits of it. Automated vehicles could replace corporate fleets for deliveries or transporting employees, for example, and workers could gain productive hours in the day by working instead of driving during daily commutes. Workers could gain productive hours during the day by working instead of driving during daily commutes. That is horrific, right?
Yes, I mean,
you've got this opportunity of like, hey, we don't need to spend time driving to a place anymore. We don't need to spend time, focusing on that. We can use that time for something else. Let's use it for productivity.
It's horrific because of the fact that is like the proceeds of that don't go to the people who are working necessarily.
Yeah.
Or like a decent chunk of the proceeds don't go to, and also they probably won't have a choice in the matter because that would be just a general force of the market is like, well, workers who work on their commutes get promoted more, so you better do it or you get left behind.
Yeah.
But the idea of freeing up hours of human productivity is a wonderful idea. It's just how the spoils of that are distributed.
I think it's a wonderful idea. Yeah. What's horrifying is not freeing up time for productivity. It's the idea that you think, oh, employees on a commute, now they have got that time. They don't need to focus on driving. We can get them working more.
But
it's about squeezing blood out of a stone. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, but I don't have an employer, but I do work, and I often choose to take the train rather than to drive because it gives me an extra hour of work time.
As do I.
Yeah.
But then we're our own boss and we're choosing that. And you know what I mean? It's for us and we enjoy the things that we do and it gives us more free time elsewhere, all of that sort of stuff. In this case, this isn't giving this person more free time elsewhere. This is taking up time that they were sinking into work unpaid and being like, okay, now you can work during this.
But you would also, the flip side of that is that you would also get paid for that time. And it's also to a certain extent that reads to me like one of these weird things where there's a great technology that's actually beneficial for society, i.e. like you have a self-driving car, which probably necessarily has to be an electric car, which means lower emissions. And it's about these ways that like we have to create justifications to big business to adopt things that are actually quite good for everyone.
Yeah, but this is my point.
That you can, if you do this thing that's good for everyone, you also get a thing out of it. Great, invest.
Yeah, but this is my point though. There's this seeming wall between the idea of autonomous vehicles and more sort of socialist policies and outlooks, right? In that this could in the same sense that sort of self-checkouts, right? They could result in less people having to work less, so you could pay them the same and just have them work less, and there's less stress on them. They can apply their energy elsewhere, and we could be a better society, you know, with people that aren't being worked to the point of depression and other mental health issues. But instead, what we do is we don't change anything about the way we operate. We just have the technology that makes things easier and have people working just as hard, if not harder.
I sense the C word coming in.
Look, all I'm saying is that it ruins everything, Luke.
What's the C word?
I'm not going to say it.
I sense the C word.
Look, my point is
if you don't say it, then they'll think I'm saying the actual C word.
No, look, the point is that capitalism here has done this.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, yeah, say the thing, Bart. Look, the point is that it's really interesting to me how, you know, the sort of people that are sort of pushing forward self-driving cars, it's your Elon Musk types, your self-proclaimed sort of libertarian types that are actually very staunchly capitalist and don't really follow through their full beliefs of sort of libertarianism there. And I guess what I'm saying here is that we could use this for so much social good, right? Like if you have a society wherein you don't need to have a job to survive, right? In that you can survive without selling your time, you know, without selling your labor, without selling your effort to someone that's just going to scoop a lot of the sort of value of that from you. We could have these self-driving cars and it makes things work way more efficiently, makes things way easier, right? Obviously, so people need to sort of run those things and maintain them and whatnot, but we can have a society where, okay, so people don't need to be bus drivers. They can find another sort of, I'm sure people love being a bus driver, right? But they could find something else. They could find something else to do with their time. They don't need to do it to work, so they have more options available to them. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But we don't have that.
We don't have that because we live in a global capitalist system where if you don't carry on growing, you'll fall behind and another country will take you over.
It's like, this is one of those things where people are like, well, people don't want to work to survive. Like, oh, they don't deserve anything. I'm like, we're going to get to a point where we don't need every single person on the planet working in order to sustain themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like, sure, when agriculture was brand new...
We've already arguably got to that point, but it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
But this is why, like, the two sort of obvious solutions to this on, like, the surface level, this is not me promoting either of these two solutions necessarily.
Kill everyone.
No. The two obvious solutions to this is, like, this is why you have, or one of the reasons why you have some people arguing for a world government and some people arguing for closed nationalism, is because those are two ways of trying to achieve that. If you close yourself off from the global market forces, then you can try to achieve that because you don't allow capital to come into your country, so you don't allow the incentives that come from sort of rich people laying down incentives to your workers in order to get them to do things that continue that system.
And how do you stop America from coming in and screwing you over?
Well, that's you close all your borders and become nationalist and don't talk to anybody ever.
But then how do you stop America from coming in and screwing you over?
Well, then, yeah, you can't. That's the trouble, is that you can't actually stop them. Like, you can't stop them, like, blowing you up. And then, so the other option is, like, people then promote, like, a global government, and then all the little governments, i.e. countries, they get anxious this, and they don't want or they like leave European Union or leave like all these other things. And also you get these conspiracy theorists going, oh, the global elite want to instantiate a global government. And like, well, yeah, they kind of do actually, but not in like an evil way, in like an efficiency way.
Yeah. This is the difficulty, right? Because I can definitely understand the sort of hesitancy towards a global government. I'm not going to sit here and be like, yes, global government, good, have one person in charge of all things. That's not what I'm saying. But the cooperation between different countries is probably a beneficial thing, right? Look, I'm going to go out on a limb here and make a very out there point. Maybe working together is good. I don't know. What do you think? Working together, maybe a good thing.
Nah. I've grown tired of this relationship. We should set up rival podcasts.
Oh, you mean work harder to compete with each other and not make a better thing?
Grow the pie, Corey.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, this is my point. Like, I like the idea of autonomous vehicles if it means making people's lives better. But I don't think that the way that a lot of people that are pushing for autonomous vehicles, I don't think that way is actually gonna make people's lives all that much better, right?
I think it will make it objectively better in the same because like, but it won't make society less unequal.
A few years ago, I was in work at the office job that I had, and it was a lot of white people. I wouldn't quite say fully racist or Islamophobic completely.
Ignorant.
No, beyond that.
Heavily ignorant.
What I'm saying is, I wouldn't say complete out and out Islamophobes, but they were Islamophobic. Okay. So there was a conversation being had in the office about, food, about how halal meat was just despicable. It's disgusting. Can you believe what they do? They hang them up and they drain them of their blood. Disgusting. And I was like, you guys are killing animals too. You realize that? They were like, yeah, but I'm like, no. The level of bad starts and ends at I am killing this thing that I don't need to.
Yeah.
You have such a huge issue with the way that you don't have an issue with the way that like Muslim people kill you have an issue with Muslim people. You kill and eat animals
you
too.
Use that to justify the fact that you don't like.
Yeah, it's like, have you ever had veal?
Have you looked into how your meat is slaughtered?
Yeah, like it's like, have you looked into how it's raised? Are you telling me that you buy like you personally make sure that every single bit of meat that you buy comes from a very, very good farm where they're all well treated? No, you don't. And even if you do, the only reason that you can do that is because you've got the money to do it. Like,
and you also might eat halal meat.
You probably do.
You have no idea.
They just honestly,
it's just that halal meat is required for Islam, but you might eat halal meat.
Yeah,
apparently a lot of store meat is halal just by accident.
Sure, that wouldn't be surprising.
Well, it makes it easier.
They don't necessarily. They don't necessarily label it as halal.
It's just shut up, honestly. Yeah. When people that eat meat try to start taking the high road on what kinds of meat, like I genuinely, and like I kind of get it, but like I mean, for me, I'm just like, unless you're sort of killing your own meat, killing your own animals, or sort of like going to a sort of local farm and getting that,
and you know how it's done,
and you know exactly how it's done, shut up.
We're not telling you to not do it. We're just saying don't try and take the high road.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I fully respect people that eat meat and say, yeah, I have no justification for this. I like it. That is far more more acceptable to me than someone who tries to like tell me that, well, actually my meat is sustainable and it's better than. Shut up. No, it's not. No, it's not.
You know how much farmland vegan people need?
Do you think of it like all the processed meat, the vegan, and we're just eating a cow? What do you think is being fed to your cow? And two, what is wrong? You realize processing foods is not bad inherently.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not. Oh gosh.
There's a really good video on this actually by Kurzgesagt called "Is Meat Really That Bad?"
Oh yeah.
And every time I see a video of that, like I go to it and I'm like, oh god, this is what you do, Corey, when you are like someone comes to you with an argument that is a counter to something you believe, and you go away and you're like, oh god, maybe they're right, and you research it. Every time I see a video called "Is Meat Really That Bad?" I'm like, oh no, is it going to tell me that actually it's not that bad? And then pretty much all the time it's like, nah, it's that bad.
Is that bad?
And I'm like, oh phew.
The only time I ever see people saying meat isn't that bad, it's when it's with all these sort of buzzwords and phrases and go-to statements that I know are wrong. Do you know what I mean? Like, as in, people pointing at, oh, well, the vegan foods are processed. Do you know how much water is required to produce? Do you realize that it is not possible for every single person on this planet to eat the amount of meat that people generally do in sort of the Western countries, and also have all of that meat be grass-fed and sustainable
and not cruel.
Yeah, and not cruel. Like it's not. So you're gonna have to feed them soy. Why not just feed us soy? Like
it's really tasty.
What bothers me is that the most simple concept of biomass does not seem to get through to these people.
Yeah, you were taught it in GCSE biology.
Yes.
Which is like the 10-to-1. Every time you feed something to an animal and then you eat that animal, you lose like 90% of the energy.
It just feels like people think that cows are coming from nowhere.
Yeah, they pop out of nowhere. The cows are there. You don't need to feed them anything.
Is that what you meant? Like the food chain,
yeah,
you lose 10
that's
to 1?
exactly what I meant.
Yeah. I remember so well learning that in literally, I think, GCSE biology.
Yeah, and it winds me up because I think you need to give a cow a lot of... cows are much bigger than us.
They have to be warm.
But you need to give a cow so much energy to make cow.
Yeah.
And also because it doesn't just use all that energy to make cow, it uses energy to keep cow being cow.
Yeah.
Right?
And move around.
And yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of wasted energy there. And then when you eat cow, there's even more wasted energy between like you eating cow and it becoming you and you using that energy. Just eat what cow eat.
Yeah.
Just eat the thing.
Yeah.
Or use the land that you're using to raise all this stuff. And it just, oh my gosh, it's insane. It baffles me, honestly, that people just don't seem to get that simple concept is like the nail in the...
They just use little mental gymnastics things to get around the things they already know.
But if they just said, I just like eating meat.
Yeah, I'd be like, all right, I can't fault that. You live in a world where eating meat is normal. I respect that.
That's fine.
Kinda. Fine.
I genuinely enjoy meat. I like it. Sometimes I think about, well, wouldn't it be nice to be stuck on a desert island because at least then I could kill and eat a pig? Like, that'd be lovely. No, but I mean, like, I think about the situations wherein I would actually eat meat, and I would eat meat if I had to. I don't mind.
Yeah.
Like, and when I say have to, I don't mean like, oh, there's nothing else on the menu. I mean, like, I will kill an animal. I don't care. Like, I don't care that.
What a psychopath.
I mean, I don't care. I don't care that much that I don't care so much that like with the choice between me killing an octopus and like me dying, of course I'd kill the octopus.
Sure.
Like I'm not gonna go out of my way to be vegan.
And the octopus is gonna try and not get killed. That's
exactly that's it.
The light. That's nature.
It's fine. Like so.
You're living at like base nature. There, it's like stuff fighting and like, oh wow,
yeah,
it's like, oh wow, I get to be like a monkey for a bit.
Exactly.
Come here, octopus. Octopus is like, no, please. Squirt eggs at you. You're like, I can see through your egg.
I'm not some bleeding heart vegan that's thinking like, oh, I don't want to ever harm anything ever. No, I will kill and eat you if I have to. I don't care. I just don't have to.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that has stopped me from eating another person. The fact that I haven't, no.
I don't need to yet.
Right, okay, I'm teaming up with Corey in the apocalypse.
So earlier on, you mentioned that, like being autistic, having autism is a disability. Other people would say, I disagree with that. I find that offensive. And it's fine. I'm not saying don't say that.
Yeah, no, I find it offensive when people say,
yeah.
I find it really offensive when people say it's not a disability, because for me, that invalidates my experience,
exactly,
my struggles with it. Yeah, so that's really upsetting for me. And I find that a lot of people that find it, or that are very strongly saying it's not a disability, it's a gift, those are the autism mums most of the time. They're like people like,
that's so true.
We gotta talk about autism mums, but I don't think that that's a healthy thing at all. And I used to kind of see it in that way too, where I thought, it makes me special, or it gives me specific gifts, or it makes some things easier, but it really doesn't. Like, maybe it makes me function in a different way, but and there are technically benefits to my autism, and I probably wouldn't be able to do certain things a certain way if I didn't have autism. But that's just, everybody has a combination of so many characteristic and individual parts and experiences that make up who they are as a person. To say that the autism is a part of that and gives you something, I think it really invalidates the hard work that somebody has to do to compensate for being autistic and the struggles that it comes with. And And I think it's the same thing where people say, oh, every good artist needs to, as an artist, if people aren't aware, my main gig is illustration. Believe it or not, I'm not a full-time artist. I mean, I am, but I do other things sometimes. I'm an artist and an artist.
Your accent makes both of those words sound almost exactly the same.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. I illustrate. I'm an illustrator. But people always say like, oh, you need to be tortured or you need to have like a mental health issues in order to make good art. And that's the same thing. It's like, no, it's not. Like, maybe yes, it influences the way that you are able to create things, but to say that those things you need those things, or to say that, oh, it's good that you have that issue because now you can make better art, or you can function in a way that you can see the world in a more beautiful way. I think that's so toxic, and I think that's so bad. I used
to be very identified with my depression and thought if I cured my depression, I wouldn't be able to make art. And then I was like, hang on, that's my depression talking. I know what you're doing there, buddy. You're trying to get me to not fix you.
Look, I'm a part of you. You can't get rid of me. I am you, buddy. Of course it's going to say that.
The moment I realized that was rubbish, I was like, oh my God, I've been listening to you this whole time.
But like equally so, I think the interesting thing with being neurodivergent as opposed to being like having a mental illness, because there are differences there. Is that like being neurodivergent isn't something that you can sort of get rid of or cure, right? And even the notion that there is sort of a cure is an iffy one, right? Whereas a mental illness, obviously, you can treat mental illnesses because in a lot of cases there's something going on with your brain that is causing said like sort of non-normative behavior. Whereas a neurodivergence is the way that it's usually described is a brain being just wired sort of differently. Which to an extent,
you can see a difference in a brain of an autistic person and somebody with ADHD, for example. But that difference to a lot of people on the spectrum and a lot of neurodivergent people is really not clear. People still think that autism is mental illness and ADHD is mental illness, and it's just not the case. It's just we're different. Like, it's like missing a leg, but the leg is your brain cells functioning in a certain way.
No. It's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, because for example, I would say depression or something like that. Everybody can get depression later on in life, but nobody can develop autism spontaneously. You can't catch it.
I will ask you this one last thing on true crime, Noah. And you don't need to answer it, but if you do, it'd be fantastic. If you could look to the camera here and just maybe say any message that you want to anyone who's thinking about doing true crime videos as someone who is very much directly related to one of those stories.
Maybe don't do that. Maybe don't do that. Like, even, oh God, I don't remember what it was. I saw this tweet like a year ago, and it was a brand deal from some true crime YouTuber or podcaster or whatever. And they posted a tweet and they were like, here's the murder of this guy that was murdered a year ago. Get like 15% off for this thing. And it's like, you are so desensitized to that. It's insane.
And you can buy your SCI GUYS branded daggers at sciGuys.co.uk.
Right. Like, seriously, I swear to God, imagine if we started selling merch that was related to this Tuskegee syphilis experiment or eugenics. Oh, little eugenics. Oh, I survived eugenics pin badges. Like, that is horrific. Think about what you're doing. You lack so much empathy, and you're spreading that to your audience.
I just think it's worth saying that, like, there is value in learning about, like, the psychology of why people tend to do things that they do, but that's not the same as there being value in, like, getting into the grisly details of how somebody was murdered, because that's what true crime is about. It's not like, oh, here are the internal thought processes of this psychopath, and this is where it comes from, and here's studies about it. It's literally just like, here's what this guy did. He stabbed the hell out of someone, and then he buried them, and then he dug them up.
It's a lot more porny than that.
Yeah, it's way worse.
And then he ripped this bit of...
Yeah, and there's like dramatic music in the background, and I'm just like, that is somebody's family.
Yeah, that's someone's mother, father, son, daughter, sibling, and uncle. You know what I mean? Like, it's someone that someone is related to, that someone knows. It was someone's friend. They had a whole life.
Yeah.
And instead of focusing on maybe the how, for example, of how someone was caught, or the why, for example, of why someone would be led to do this, you focus on the what.
Yeah.
You're only focusing on the what. We don't focus on the what when we cover these things, right? And like, you might be wondering, oh, Corey, this is an episode on serial killers, the science of serial killers. Why are you spending so much time talking about true crime? Why are you spending so much time not talking about the psychology of serial killers? Because I want this episode to be about the psychology of serial killers and also about maybe the psychology behind why people really, really want to see an episode on the psychology of serial killers.
Yeah, you weirdos voted this one in.
Look, our patrons are great. No, our patrons are absolutely fantastic. But what I will say is that this show, I wouldn't say that we're afraid to have difficult conversations or say things that might make you uncomfortable to think about or, contend with. And I will say to our audience, to our patrons, maybe consider why it is that you want to understand, why it is you want to see an episode on serial killers, right? Why you want to see us delve into that topic. Is it because you want to understand this weird quirk of humanity more deeply?
I think probably, yeah.
Maybe, but is it also because you've been somewhat desensitized to the concept of serial killing? You think it's a much more common thing than it is, and you want to understand it on some weird, macabre, sort of, visceral level,
kinky level.
Well, not kinky, but I mean, like there is like a sort of almost like it is this very sick thing, but there is some kind of pleasure in trying to understand that. And yeah, that's all I'll say. That like consider why you engage with the content that you engage with. If you're into true crime, ask yourself why. Ask yourself what it's adding to the world. Ask yourself what you're actually getting from it. Let's say there are multiple routes to having gender dysphoria. It's really hard to delineate which route someone has taken. You know what I mean? Just based on the endpoint of you've been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. In the same sense that if you've got like 5 people that have been diagnosed with depression, you have no idea what led any of those 5 to being depressed. One of them could be depressed because of trauma. One of them could be depressed, because of a chemical imbalance. There could be any number of different reasons, Do
you also think there could just be, I just think some people are just trans. It's interesting because I'm just like, there could be causes, but maybe that's just how their brain works. Like, maybe that's just how they feel.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that's kind of brought up, is that, what you were mentioning earlier about a lot of autistic traits.
What do you mean by that?
As in, like, there doesn't necessarily have to be a cause. It doesn't have to be...
But there will ultimately be a cause. If someone is just trans, then, as in there's no prenatal hormone or there's no societal reason, then it's genetic. Or then that's the cause.
I guess
there'll ultimately be a cause.
I don't think of genetics as a cause, but obviously it is.
Well, yeah. If you eliminate all the rest of them, then I imagine genetics would be the cause.
Yeah.
Is there any other things? If it wasn't societal, it wasn't prenatal, it wasn't experiences in the womb, it wasn't being raised and experiences or trauma or anything like that.
Yeah, that's pretty much everything, isn't it?
And then genetics.
Yeah.
Or a soul.
A soul. Yeah, well that's what I mean. Like maybe it's just like a...
You're a man soul.
Yeah.
I think when we talk about the cause of something, I think what we should point out right now, this is a great point to talk about this, is that we tend to only talk about causes when it's a deviation from the norm.
And when it's something you're trying to fix.
Right. So for example, what causes neurotypicality? Right?
Yeah.
Like what causes that?
A certain amount of genetics, a certain amount of untraumatic childhood.
Exactly. but we don't that's the thing. We don't talk about it in that sense. We don't say, oh, well, what causes people to be straight?
Yeah.
We don't ask that question. And I think it's important to pay attention to the language that we use surrounding sort of these things. Like we're looking, when we were speaking about, the gay gene a couple years ago in that episode with Rowan Ellis, watch that. This is a really good episode for calling back.
So many plugs.
I know, right? When we were talking about the gay gene, one of the questions that kind of comes up is, why are we looking for a cause for being gay? Do you know what I mean? Like we view it as, there are certain things that we sort of view as needing to find a cause for. And I think that can be sort of an issue, having that sort of mindset of like, what causes this thing? In particular, because you kind of then get stuck on the idea that there's one thing that makes this one, that has this one outcome.
I don't totally agree. I think there's a lot of analysis going on of like what causes us to have a nuclear family, what causes us to be monogamous. There's a lot of talk about that kind of stuff, which is the norm.
More so
We've
now.
done episodes about that.
Sure, yeah. More so now, right? Yeah. But that's not necessarily that. You can't say that that's the overall sort of viewpoint that
the history of it.
the history as well, and the overall sort of way that we operate. Right, we're not looking for a straight gene, for example. Right.
Well, I feel like not looking for a straight gene is maybe not a particularly good example, because there ultimately have to be in our specific genetics, there have to be some females and some males who have sex in order for them to be people.
And they can be
at all.
bisexual.
Yeah, of course.
So why
sure.
are we?
You mean exclusive heterosexuality gene?
Exclusive heterosexuality gene.
Sure.
Why are we not looking for that?
Perfectly interesting thing.
No, it would be a perfectly interesting thing. I'm not saying that we can't look for the reasons that something can come about. I'm not saying that we can't look for a cause. But what I'm saying is that when people often say, let's look for the cause of this, there's more to it than that. I'm not saying that we don't ever I'm not saying that we never investigate, the sort of how things happen. Like, obviously we've looked at like what causes monogamy, blah, blah, blah. But my point is more that when we talk about finding the cause for something, almost necessarily we're imagining something else as being a baseline.
Yeah.
And where we place that baseline is important, and we tend to ignore that. I'm not saying that we don't look at certain things. I'm just saying that the way that we talk and think about the things that we do is something that we should be doing.
Yeah, I think that to a certain extent comes from the fact that it's quite, even though it's potentially a bad thought process to have, there's a real big impetus, especially for parents, to look at the world and go, okay, the world is unjust in some ways. The world is unjust towards people like this. The world's unjust to people like this. I'm going to have a child, and I want my child's life to be as easy as it can be. Mm-hmm. Even though if my child turned out to be, like if X child turned out to be gay or X child turned out to be autistic, you would love them, but you also know that life is going to be harder for those people. And we can make as many efforts as we like to try and make that not harder and to talk about that and put systems in place to make it not harder. But I think a lot of people are looking out are just wanting their child to have the easiest, not best life, but like easiest life possible with the fewest complications. And so they're naturally going to look for, well, what causes these things that make life harder, even though we can put things in place to make it not harder for them.
I was going to say, but there's also things of like, there are benefits of having ADHD, there are benefits of having autism, and it's like, obviously a lot of the time there are bad points to it, but I think a big thing is that people see. I had this talk with my therapist about it because I mentioned that I thought I was autistic in my last therapy session. He was like, well, do you see it as like something wrong with you or something negative? And I'm like, not necessarily, because it's probably shaped some of the behaviors that I experienced that benefited me in some way. So I think it's interesting. Like, I understand the point of like, if you're autistic, you're probably more likely to have a difficult childhood and upbringing. But there's also the kind of thing where it's just like, maybe it's just not something wrong. It's just something different.
Yeah, and I absolutely don't ascribe to this thought process, by the way.
No, I know.
I am a child who fully, like, everyone was trying to get me to be normal, and I was like, that's not happening. There's no way. And I think I turned out all right. And you've turned out great as well.
But you wouldn't be doing the stuff you do if you were normal.
Sure,
you wouldn't be as good at it if you were normal.
Well, absolutely.
I don't think you'd be physically capable of doing any
all
of this.
I mean is I think there are a lot of people who just want their child to not bump into the sides too much and just have a, like,
But then this is exactly what I'm trying to point out here, right? Because the way that you've said that is really interesting, because you said that people are looking for what causes these things that make life more difficult. You've not said what causes the things that makes life easier, right? People don't look for what causes straightness.
Yes.
They look for what causes, because what I'm saying is that when you say what causes X, you're placing the sort of
the assumption is that if you don't hit those causes, then you'll be the norm.
You'll be the norm, right? Yeah. And for example,
and it's a bad assumption.
For all we know, right? And okay, put it this way, right? Based on some of the studies that we've done with like arousal in cisgender women, right? Yeah. We've seen the arousal in cisgender women appear like they have a bisexual arousal pattern. I'm not going to go too deep into what that means. That doesn't mean
there's a whole actual episode on that.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Science of transgender sexuality, I think, is probably it.
Very interesting.
So we look at that, and we can look at other things like homosexuality in prisons, or an increasing number of people identifying as LGBT. As society becomes more accepting of these things, we could look in the past where there wasn't quite the same understanding of straight, gay, bisexual. There was more, it was either more fluid, or there were different sort of conceptions of it. Like, for example, in, I think, ancient Rome, it wasn't a case of being necessarily gay. You were young and you were basically a bottom. And then as you became older, you were a man and you were a top. And that was how that identity worked. So the idea that we've got of being like, gay isn't the same as it used to be. The idea that we have of being like lesbian, I was talking to someone about this the other day, where like, we have issues with, younger people not wanting to identify as lesbian, or people have issues with trans men identifying as lesbians, or people identifying as lesbians and using pronouns that aren't she, her. But lesbianism for a long time, and being gay for a long time, wasn't just who you wanted to have sex with. It was the culture surrounding it.
Yeah, like a lot of bisexual women would were called gay.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's so many different understandings of all these words, right? And my point here, and I'm getting to it, my point here is, right, that we could conceive that, for example, bisexuality, like, the concept of bisexuality, of being capable of being attracted to men and women, or males and females, or however you want to describe it, right? We could take the idea that that is the norm, and any variation upon that is abnormal, right? Or not abnormal, but a deviation from the norm. But we don't view it that way at all, because we have a very strict society wherein heterosexual is the norm, and you must be like I cannot tell you the number of supposedly straight men that I've spoken to who have said, "Oh yeah, to be honest, I think I might like, be into guys a bit, but I'm into girls, so I'll stick with that."
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it'll be interesting, like, what if the norm was to have this level of trans people and this many trans people, and maybe the fact that there are so few is because so few people come out. Like, the norm is only the norm because we say it is, and the society that we're living in is enforcing a specific type of norm. And I think that's, like, a difficult thing to get away from.
I mean, my only point here is that we sometimes need to, I think, pull ourselves out of the, like, the idea of what we see as the norm. And when we talk about, what causes this deviation, we're inherently then saying that it's some kind of deviation, usually, and it's just something to be aware of.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So we kind of, I think, really covered the idea that autistic people are less likely to conform to social norms, and then so will be more likely to identify outside of the stereotypical gender, sex binary, and therefore identify as transgender, or potentially have gender dysphoria due to that that sort of mismatch there. Now, I do have a quote here from a paper. It says, "We identified some aspects of gender dysphoria which interacted with autism. Autism was described as having a positive effect on the understanding of gender for some individuals, with being autistic facilitating awareness of gender identity. This is consistent with ideas of autistic people being resistant to social conditioning regarding gender and gender defiance in autistic people."
Yeah, gender defiance.
I know, right?
I will not conform.
And we've spoken about the prenatal sex hormones and how that could have an impact. And also, interestingly, I found a study that interviewed 16 clinicians, 16 people from gender clinics, like sort of doctors working there. I'm pretty sure they were doctors. Yeah, clinicians working at gender clinics. They interviewed them about autism and gender dysphoria. And again, really interestingly, the researchers received advice on, the design of the study and the actual questions. They received advice from 6 autistic people, which is great. So a lot of the studies that you'll find linked below, I mean, pretty much all of them are actually like really, really solid in terms of being trans positive. And this is not me, by the way, looking specifically for trans positive studies. I have just, those are just the ones that I've come across. And those are the ones that, are sort of the most recommended and all of that sort of thing. Like, it's pretty cool that, these studies are being done by people who are not trying to say, that really awful, like, ableist and transphobic stuff that, having autism and being trans means that you've been tricked because of your autism making you more gullible, or whatever it is that trans folks are saying nowadays. What I find interesting is that the deaf community is one that is, as far as, the disabled community goes, the deaf community are a group of people that a lot of people in the deaf community don't want to be seen as disabled, and they reject the label disabled, which you really only see otherwise, and I guess sort of the autistic community and groups like that, because you can be almost entirely self-sufficient when you're deaf. It just takes people paying attention to the fact that you're deaf and taking that into account, like, that's all it takes.
I went to a workshop at Cannes this year with people who, some of whom identified as differently abled as opposed to disabled, and they weren't deaf, or weren't necessarily deaf, and they weren't necessarily autistic, they were had different abilities, sometimes physical abilities, and they are identified as differently abled. So I just thought it was worth bringing in there.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. My point is not just the term disabled or differently able.
I get that as a deaf person, because in some sense it is a disability, right? However, I'm not like, I haven't, there's nothing wrong. I have very good sight. My physical mobility is fine. It's just, I guess I can't hear so much. But like, it's weird because I feel like I do fit and I don't fit into this disabled, or what I suppose people think of when they hear the word disabled as well. People hear the word disabled, or see the word disabled. Anyway.
Not quite woke enough there, Elliot.
People see the word disabled and they will think of someone in a wheelchair, or think of just a disability that isn't necessarily deafness, and it's a spectrum.
Yay! I do think I'm glad you brought that up, because that was the next point I was about to make, that I think the rejection of the disabled label has got less to do with actually being disabled, in the sort of strictest sense of the word, and more with the social view of what disability is. And I guess as well, we could very briefly talk about the social model of disability, right? Wherein the classic example is, imagine that, tomorrow you wake up and everybody's got sort of wings and everyone's able to fly, and they start, removing stairs and, all of that sort of stuff. So you can't fly, but you're perfectly able to get up to that building if they just have stairs there. And why are there not stairs? I can get there if you give me stairs. That's kind of an idea of the social model of disability, that disability comes not necessarily from, within the person or within the disability itself.
It's a societal sort of, yeah, definitely. Like the societal, like, accessibility to things. For example, if I went to this, cinema, I think about this all the time when I go to like screenings and events. I just wish they would subtitle it. The amount of people who aren't deaf who use subtitles because they have auditory processing disorder, or because they just find it helps, because I'm not gonna lie, TV nowadays has so many sounds going on at once. It can be really difficult, and also the actors' lips might not always be visible on the screen when they're talking. I just think that subtitles should just be everywhere, or just used in cinema way, way, way more than they actually are.
I don't see a problem with it.
It just makes it so accessible to people. And what you were saying about societal...
Just to touch on the subtitles part, I think it's interesting because Noah, the fifth SCI guy, uses subtitles constantly because he has ADHD and it helps him focus on what is being said. I can use subtitles, and I sometimes like having subtitles on. Other times I get too focused on reading the subtitles, or the subtitles are bad and they ruin jokes. And so I will, if I'm watching a comedy and I can have the subtitles off, generally I will turn them off because the subtitles are bad. Nothing to do with the subtitles themselves. But then I also have a friend who also probably has ADHD and cannot stand subtitles because that's all that they can focus on. Like we've watched a film with them, and they're like, I've seen them literally hold up a piece of paper to cover the bottom of the screen because Noah was like, I need subtitles or this is unintelligible to me.
Yes.
And this friend was like, well, I need to have this covered or I cannot watch it. And like I get like having subtitles everywhere, that would probably be for the best. But it's so interesting how these different sort of of accessibility needs can conflict with one another.
Yeah, absolutely.
It feels like you could just have again, I'm just going to say I went to Cannes again this year. It just feels like
did you go to Cannes? Did you go to Cannes, the film festival? Cannes?
It's a coincidence that this is two stories so far have come up. I went to Cannes this year, below the cinema screens, because we're in France and not everyone's speaking English because it's an international festival.
Oh, you went to an international film festival?
Oh,
Cannes.
yeah, to Cannes, yeah.
Oh, cool.
They had like a little mini screen underneath, almost like a Nintendo DS. Underneath all the screens, there's a little mini screen that has the subtitles on.
Oh.
And that was great, but then you're right, like it might be annoying if you, for example, are somebody who cannot pay attention to anything when the subtitles are there. That might be difficult in a different way. We could just have like little 3D glasses or something.
I was thinking,
that is a
it's
thing,
invisible
isn't it?
if you don't have the glasses on.
Yeah, well, there are so many ways that we can make things accessible.
What's that, Cannes?
No,
I went to Cannes this year.
There are so many ways that we could make things accessible.
Yeah.
Anyways, so no, I find it really, really interesting how all of this sort of works, and I think that the deaf community is one that is really almost the poster child for this. I'm rejecting the label disabled because I'm not disabled, you're the problem. And I understand that to a great degree. Like, I really get it. Like with ADHD, it's very much a thing of like, okay, look, there are issues that I deal with, and there are issues that I'm going to deal with regardless of having ADHD or not. But also, you could make life easier for me.
Absolutely.
Look, I'm going to be 5-10 minutes late. Don't be on me for that, because I'm coming in and I'm doing more work than you anyway. Do you know what I mean? Like, okay, this deadline is a bit of an issue. If it can be moved by a day, let it move by a day, and don't have a go at me for it, because I have a disorder. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I get rejecting the label disability, and I get pointing out where accessibility is like, it could, where we making things accessible could make life easier. But also, I think that we need to really sit and think about how we feel about the label disabled, because, again, society has put all of these connotations on the label disabled. But if you just put your hands up and say, look, there are some things that, you know, because of the way my body works, the way my brain works, blah, 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 there are some things that I can't do that other people do, or certain needs that I have that other people maybe don't have. And, you know, if it crosses a certain threshold, then we call that disability. I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing. And I think it would be really beneficial to sort of remove those negative connotations of disability, because if it was just a neutral thing of like, hey, I'm disabled in this way, that's perfectly fine. And I'm not saying that you know, that deaf people should want to call themselves disabled or whatnot. I totally understand it. I'm just saying, as a general sort of societal move, having less of a stigma towards disability, I think, would be a net positive for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I had so many things that I've like started thinking about as well. Like, if we're talking about like society and the way it views things, I was on the BBC, All That Glitters, jewelry making.
You were on the BBC?
Yeah, I was on the.
Oh my god, are we just dropping like fun things that we've done?
No, but I was gonna say, like, as a deaf person, watching a hearing person put the ear cuffs that had been made for me on, watching someone who was hearing put those on, and like just seeing how they'd sort of like accessorized their ear and made it look cool. I was like, oh, I wish everyone just could wear ear jewelry like that. And like, it was just what you said about sort of like just having this net place that society is at would
if you're not understanding what I'm meaning, or you're like, what are you talking about? Okay, let me just, if you're watching this, let me just very quickly illuminate exactly what I mean. I am disabled in that I cannot see without, like, I can't see, my hand is in focus. For everyone listening, I've just taken off my glasses because I don't have contacts in today. I can't see my hand in focus until it's here. For anyone listening, that's about 6 inches away from my face. I would literally be disabled if it were not for the fact that glasses are accessible and affordable and just easy to get. And people don't look down on people for wearing glasses, to the point where what you were saying there, where, you know, glasses are now jewelry. People will wear glasses when they don't need to wear glasses because they look cool.
Absolutely.
In the same sense that I feel like you're saying, oh, it'd be cool if people wore hearing aids, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, just like ear cuffs and like cool.
I think your hearing aids look really tight. Like I would literally wear that, because I'm like, that's a cool, like, you've got like a red in your ear. That's like a cool way to accessorize, right?
I've started color coordinating with the red. Like, honestly, here's the thing. I came from a place of being so ashamed of my deafness. Right? When I was, you know, especially, okay, for anyone watching who doesn't know who I am, I'm also trans, and I used to have long hair, and it would cover my hearing aids because I was too scared of people seeing them. But then, sort of with transitioning, I wanted to cut my hair short, and that was like the first time in my life that I was showing off my hearing aids. And then I sort of started to reach a point where I was like, I actually shouldn't feel ashamed of this anymore, and if anything, want to show it off and make it visible. And especially what we've been saying about society and like how people perceive you, I kind of want people to see that I'm deaf, because I need people to know that they need to be patient with me. And one of the things that you were saying about you know, if you've got ADHD and you've got this deadline due, you're asking them for patience. You're just asking them for understanding. And like, that's kind of how I want the public to be like. Most of the time they're fine when I tell them I'm deaf, and they're like, oh, I'm really sorry, I didn't realize. But like, I've not really had any major problems. I've had a couple, but
well, I would actually argue that I don't think people need to be patient with you. And this is, Elliot, this is coming from my interactions with you and other people, in that I've seen situations, and I've tried to be more conscious of this myself since having conversations with you about this, but all you need most of the time is, if you're in a loud environment, is for people to look at you when they're talking.
Yes.
And it's not hard. It's not hard at all. But like, I look around when we're in a group talking, I look around and people just don't think about it. And all it takes is just hey, think about this just a little bit, and it's all good. I don't even think you need patience, because when people are giving you patience, it's because they're not giving you what you need in the first place. You know what I mean? Which is just,
I think what I mean is
involving you.
Yeah. So like I've started work. I've got this retail job recently, and it's I won't say where it is because I don't want to dox myself, but
it's in the description. I put it down in the description.
It's in London somewhere, and a lot of the customers that we get in might have an accent or might have flown in internationally from somewhere, and I really struggle with accents and stuff, so it's just like, I guess, patience in that sense, because I will be asking them to repeat themselves a lot.
Fair.
It's I was gonna say, in terms of like allyship to a deaf person, what you were saying within our friendship group, Noah's birthday where we all went go-kart racing, and he literally, everyone was gathered round getting the instructions before we went and did it, and Noah came and grabbed me and put me at the front, like literally was like, mate, can you hear him okay? Can you lip read okay? And I was just like, that is so considerate. Like, that was a real standout moment to me where a friend has actually been considerate in that way.
Yeah.
It's not like I expect people to make a massive deal out of it, but like what you said, just being considerate and like thinking, oh, there's a deaf person in this situation, I don't want to exclude them.
Well, I get it. It's the bare minimum though. And again, to bring it back to the glasses thing, this is not me being like, oh yeah, wearing glasses is the same as being blind or being deaf. That's not my point. My point is that it literally would be, were it not for all of the infrastructure and, you know, the social sort of accessibility that we've got to the sort of like aids that you need to, you know, sort of engage with the world when you have like a myopia or something. You know?
There's also lots of positive social connotations to wearing glasses.
Yeah.
Like, and there, someone once asked me about this. I don't know if you get this. Like, sometimes people will just ask me things and expect me to know the answer because we do a science podcast.
Literally all the time.
They asked me like, why are glasses seen as sexy? So I went away and did some research, and like, apparently it's like in part because there's some correlation between a gene that causes poor eyesight and intelligence level. Whether that's true, I don't know. But imagine if it was like, oh, you're wearing hearing aids. You must have fantastic fashion sense.
I absolutely do.
I mean, if we're looking at Elliot, honestly, yeah. I don't want to curtail this conversation, but I'm gonna have to get into the science. The last thing I'll say on this.
No. Let's get into science.
The last thing I'll say is, again, look, glasses are a thing that are ubiquitous across sort of society, right? We all like know someone that wears glasses. In fact, we don't even think about people that we know that wear glasses because we don't even think about it, right? And with a lot of different aids for disability, or a lot of different disabilities, we could just have that view, that sort of outlook, and that mode of dealing with them, and yet we don't, right? And when I'm saying like all it takes is that little bit of consideration. Like, if I'm not wearing my glasses and someone knows that, like if I've just woken up and I'm like, oh, I don't have my glasses on, or I'm like, hey, can you point out where they are because I don't remember where I left them. Like it's just being, oh, there they are, or let me show you this on your phone, and like holding it up to my face so I can see it. It's like little things like that aren't even like things. It's just bearing in mind who you're interacting with, right? Like that's all it takes. Goodness me, that was a lot of clips. I hope the aliens enjoyed it, Luke.
Please don't probe me.
Probing would be an excellent reward for a year's worth of good SCI Guys episodes. But look at that. No probing for us, because it appears I can see out of the window that is over there that the aliens are flying away.
Left. Maybe it's because they hated the podcast so much they thought, goodness me, we've got to get out of here.
Don't you worry, Luke. The president of the world called me and told me that it's actually because they enjoyed the podcast so much they couldn't destroy the planet the podcast was made on.
Wow, that is reassuring.
Well, that is it from us, I think. But before we go, we've got to thank all of our patrons, obviously, with a very special thank you to exec producers Dinito and Glitch Rabbit. And thank you for watching, aliens and non-aliens alike. Subscribe for new episodes every Sunday, and why not leave us a nice wee comment? Wee! You can support the pod at patreon.com/SciGuys, or you can find a contact at SciGuysPod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and at SciGuys on TikTok too. Or you can send us an email at sciguyspod@gmail.com.
That's sciguyspod@gmail.com. Sciguyspod@gmail.com.
You can follow me at NotGar everywhere.
You can follow me at Luke Cutforth everywhere. And
Goodbye.
You can follow the aliens back to Mars. Goodbye!
They're Martians. Goodbye!